The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 161. Not suspicious enough. Lex did not know exactly what to expect when he returned. A part of him expected to land in the middle of a war-torn battleground, with buildings half destroyed and bullets flying in the air. Maybe he expected the city to be under lockdown. Maybe he was thinking he would see soldiers pushing innocent civilians around, and a band of resistance fighters made up from civilians fighting back. The fanciful stories he had filled his head with were many, but the one thing he was not expecting at all was for everything to be normal. Though it was early in the day, people could be seen walking around the streets casually. Some were walking their dogs, others were sitting on benches and reading books. The wind raised a few skirts, a few men slammed cabs and yelled, "I'm walking here," and a few other, completely standard and not at all stereotypical everyday things happened. At first, Lex was amazed. Then he frowned. War was definitely happening, the system had confirmed it and so many guests had confirmed it, so how was everything so normal? Completely underwhelmed, Lex walked into a cafe and tried to eavesdrop on nearby conversations. If anything significant had happened, the people would be talking about it. Significant news there was, just not what Lex was expecting. The people were talking about the unusual internet outage that was apparently affecting everyone. News channels were not reporting on it and no official statement was being released. Just a single hour of blocked internet access could send various companies into massive loss in the city, yet somehow everyone was okay with it. Lex took out his phone and turned it on to see if he was getting any signals. He didn't know how else he would contact Larry, or anyone else, for that matter. Contrary to what Lex expected, his phone was working just fine. He was about to try an international call to his family when he started receiving messages. The first was from Bluebird. Until further notice, the Bluebird portal will not be available. Please contact your nearby Bluebird office if you need any help. The second, again, was from Bluebird. A curfew is now in effect. All cultivators must remain home unless provided a pass. Any cultivator discovered breaking curfew, or without their Bluebird token, will be detained pending a treason trial. The third was from Larry. Your phone is powered off, but you should get this if you turn your phone back on. Things are not as they seem. Be safe. Contact me if you need help. Subtly, Lex nodded. The suspicious behavior was more in line with what he expected. Based on what he had heard so far, the ICPAs were locking down their regions of control and were a part of the war. Since all of New York was so thoroughly under Bluebird's control, they probably didn't need to use soldiers to snatch control. They just needed to maintain as much normalcy as they could manage until the global situation stabilizes. Lex tried calling his family, but the call would not connect. He tried calling Larry, and the phone was off. He tried calling Larry again, but this time on a second number he had given Lex to use in case of emergencies. The call went through, but after it was picked up, there was complete silence. No one on the other side said anything. Is anyone there? Lex asked hesitantly. Lex? Is that you? Larry asked, his voice easily identifiable. But before Lex could answer, he said, "Don't say anything. I'm sending you a location. Come alone. Don't bring your token." After receiving the text, Lex followed the directions only to find himself standing before a dollar store in Uptown. He explored the store and could not find Larry, so he tried calling again, but the phone was powered off. At this point, Lex frowned. It was dangerous to randomly roam around the city, especially since he did not have his token. He could still recall how his previous boss had immediately identified him as a cultivator. They had to get extremely close for her to notice, but then again, she wasn't actively searching for anyone either. Just as he was wondering what to do, a man in a hoodie with the hood down approached him. "Hey Lex, follow me," Larry said in a hushed voice, and quickly led him to an apartment building nearby. Silently climbing up 7 flights of stairs, they reached the room where Larry was hiding. As soon as they entered, Larry activated some formation he had in the room and let out an audible sigh of relief. "Damn, this thing is so hot," he said as he took off his hoodie. "What's with all the drama?" Lex asked casually. As per usual, Larry's face was covered in bruises, probably from working in that club where he fought people. "Yeah, I have some bad news for you, buddy. By the way, turn your phone off while we talk. I'm carrying a signal jammer on me, so no one could have followed us through tracking your phone, but better safe than sorry." "Is your bad news about the war?" Larry paused, clearly surprised to hear Lex. "You already know?" "A little." "What do you know?" "Not much, but a lot of people I know got picked up by Bluebird. I haven't heard from them since. Then a contact of mine, an old associate of my family, told me about the war. I don't even know who is fighting who, but it must be pretty bad. All markets, like the one that I took you to last time, have been shut down. Considering the shutdown in communication and the curfew, I've never seen it this bad. I've tried 100 things, but I haven't been able to connect to the net. As Lex followed Larry into the apartment, he realized it was nothing like the beat-up and worn-down building it was hiding in. There were computers everywhere. Wires crisscrossed the apartment, though bolted to the floor or walls so as to not get in the way. There were at least a dozen different monitors, all showing different things. Lex was not a tech-illiterate person, but this was even beyond him. Listen, do you have any way of contacting anyone abroad? Currently, no. The moment I'm able to connect to the net, I'll be able to. But God knows when that'll be. Lex took a look at things and finally felt a sense of relief. At least his friend was okay. He spent a couple hours chatting with Larry, finding out as much as he could about Bluebird's actions. They had been very discreet, but certain forces had been targeted by them as far as Larry knew. If any fights broke out, they were handled swiftly and efficiently, so that no news had spread so far. They were keeping the peace for the general public right now, but who knew how long this would go on? Well, I'm glad you're safe, Larry. I just came to check up on you. You're doing a good job staying low-key, but if you get in trouble, use this. Lex handed him a golden key, preparing to explain to him how to use it, but Larry froze when he laid eyes on it. That's the golden key, he exclaimed. It's the key that's been all over the net. There have been so many conspiracy theories in such a short time, don't tell me they're real. Conspiracy theories? Lex asked, confused. Yes, if the net were working, I'd show you. They say that such keys have been passing around top government officials and high-leveled cultivators recently. No one knows for sure what they do, but those conspiracy theorists claim the keys can take you to a secret society that only the rich and powerful are a part of. They claim that our world is ruled by families, hidden in the dark, who have been using these keys to signify members of their secret society. Don't tell me this is real. Lex chuckled, and despite all that was happening, suddenly felt amused. He did not realize that one day he would become a source of conspiracy theories. The funny thing was, those theorists were remarkably close to the truth about many things. I don't know about all of that, but if you get into trouble with Bluebird or anyone else, break the key. Despite Larry asking multiple times, Lex didn't say what the key did. At this point, it wasn't for safety or secrecy purposes, he just wanted to see the surprised look on Larry's face when he used the key for the first time. Of course, he would still not tell anyone he was the Innkeeper. But now that the keys were circulating on Earth, it was much safer for him to hand them out to people. As he walked out of Larry's building, chuckling as he thought about how Larry would react, he did not notice two men staring at him. The variable has left. The target is alone in the building. What are your orders? One of them said into an earpiece. After getting the reply, the man nodded to his partner and the two of them entered Larry's building, each carrying a gun. Chapter 162 Take a Shower. Other than Larry, there were a few other people Lex wanted to check up on, but meeting everyone in person would take too much time. He gave everyone a call and left a few voice messages, all the while making his way to a park. Finding a remote area, he hid between some bushes and teleported back to the inn. His mood was somewhat better now and only improved when he learned that someone had completed his commission for information about London. He wasted no time and retrieved the report, expecting a situation similar to New York. But the situation in the UK was actually quite different. Even though the council had vast influence, basically feeding off of the original connections, they could not influence everyone. As the Queen's place of residence, her palace was full of her closest followers. In many places around the world, armed forces were directly neutralized by turning their own defensive formations against them by spies, yet the Queen's Guard was exceptionally well trained. Even under such strenuous circumstances, they put up a fierce fight and escaped. The palace was destroyed and a few other fights broke out all across the nation as the elite guards made their escape. The good news, for Lex anyway, was that while many soldiers and cultivators suffered casualties, there were minimal civilian casualties, and those too were only near the palace. The bad news was that the entire nation was in a strict lockdown. The official news being spread to the public was that there was an assassination attempt on the royal family orchestrated by terrorists and rival nations. A decent number of those experts had escaped and there was no information of where they might be, so it could not be determined when the situation would change. But since his family had nothing to do with any such matters, he felt that they were probably safe. With that stone off his shoulders, he suddenly realized how effective the inn could be at collecting information. Hey Mary, can I ask you for a favor? What is it? Can you keep an eye on my guests? I'm thinking of building a news collection service, and need someone who would be good at something like that. But I need someone with a real knack for something like this, as I'll want him to collect sensitive information in every world we connect to. Before Mary could answer, the familiar ting of a quest rang in Lex's mind. New quest, find an employee who can run a news service. Quest time limit, none. Quest reward, midnight news building. Remarks, for the first time, the host has taken a decent initiative. Now take the initiative to take a bath. After a long, long time, Lex lost his self-control, and his lip once again twitched. The twitch. It had returned. Lex could not help it, it was a reflex to the lethal remarks of the system. What embarrassed him the most was, he had been so busy lately that, he forgot, and it had indeed been a few days since he showered. Taking in a deep breath, he pushed down his agitation and looked back at Mary. I'll keep an eye out. For something like there are a few races that are better suited than others. It'll be your luck if you run across one, and you'll be luckier to find one suited to work for you. All I can do is pay attention. That'll be enough, he remarked. The new quest reminded Lex that he had quite a few quests racked up, and he had not even checked the reward for the quest to expose the devil's planting trackers on his guests. He went through the quests list, just as a reminder. Quests. 1. Prepare an event for your guests to participate in. Status, ongoing. 2. Build a connection to Dunya. 3. Develop a permanent guest district. 4. One of your guests wants to use the inn to host a secret society. Aid your guest. 5. Host refugees. 6. Find an employee who can run a news service. Many of these quests could not be completed in the short term. The permanent district was too difficult for him at the moment, and the world Dunya he had encountered while using a golden ticket was too dangerous for the current him. The secret society meeting he had decided to complete after the midnight games ended. For the refugees, he had already spread the word, and as far as finding an employee was concerned, it was up to luck. Shaking his head, he decided to look at his quest reward. Surprisingly, it was pretty good. Security room. As a prominent establishment, the Midnight Inn must ensure the safety of its guests. But as an inn for the entire universe, even 1 trillion guests at a time are too few. The security room can be used by the inn's security guards to monitor malicious intent among the guests, to protect them as well as prevent them from making trouble. This was an incredible reward, probably one of the best and most practical he'd received yet. It improved his mood tremendously. Lex made a plan on how to install it and what to do about security now that he had a decent amount of MP, but all that could wait till after the games. Speaking of which, a quick scan of the inn let him know that the second game had already begun. Not for all parties though, only for Pramod and 99 of his zombies. They'd entered the map 2 hours early. The secret advantage they had received was invincibility. For 1 minute, they would be able to activate the ability to be completely invincible to any and all external influence. This was a tremendous ability that could aid them in attacking as well as defending, but other than themselves, no one knew what the ability was. That made them even more dangerous. Pramod used the extra time he had gained to alter the terrain. The map this time was the side of a mountain covered by a forest, with a castle carved into the mountain at a certain point. The node was, naturally, inside the castle. Pramod immediately controlled the zombies to start cutting down trees and building various walls and digging various ditches. He could not do anything too insidious, as all the guests outside could see everything on the screens, but still, he manipulated the environment to give himself an advantage. At first, Lex thought of watching the match outside again, but then disregarded it. The system could take care of everything and at least this did not need his supervision. With that, he had some free time on his hands. Now it was time to do something he had been putting off for a while. Lex lay down on his bed and summoned the bottle of purified wraith's blood. This little reward would help him strengthen his soul, but also put him to sleep for a few hours. Now, more than ever, he was anxious to raise his cultivation. Watching a 17-year-old foundation cultivator was only a part of the motivation. As cliché as it sounded, he realized how little power he really had. Sure, normally on Earth, he could survive and thrive with his skills by earning a decent living. But that was only if he operated inside a working system that governed society. During exceptional times, such as war, when that system could not influence anything, he was powerless. Strong personal connections and strong personal strength were the things he decided would help him. Without waiting anymore, he gulped down the wraith's blood and lay down in bed. Sleep did not suddenly come to him, but slowly and steadily his mind slowed, until he fell asleep without even realizing when. Just as Lex fell asleep, at the front of Midnight Manor, a light flashed and a bleeding Larry appeared. His body was covered completely by a thin layer of metal that rippled as he fell to the ground. It was as if his skin was made of mercury. But despite the metal skin, several gunshot wounds littered his body. His legs, especially, had nearly a dozen bleeding holes in them, though somehow he was not bleeding as much as he should have been. He looked around for a moment, confused and muddle-headed, but could not understand where he was. A moment later a few panicked AIs approached him, followed by Velma. "Dear guest, you are gravely wounded. Do you give me permission to take you to the recovery room?" Larry looked at her, and nodded, only hearing the word recovery, but then collapsed right after. Quickly, call Gerard. We cannot let a guest die on our watch. The A.I.S scrambled to do as they were told, and Larry quickly found himself in a recovery pod. Just by happenstance, as he was being taken in, Marlowe was exiting another room, and happened to see his bleeding student. His eyes went red with fury. Chapter 163 Smoking Hot. On Earth, two pale-looking agents stood in Larry's room, leaning against furniture for support. Bullet casings littered the ground, along with bits and pieces of broken furniture. Clearly, there had been an intense fight here, and the two armed men did not hold an overwhelming advantage. We have a problem, one of the men said, after calling someone. The target used an unknown item and escaped. But he suffered multiple gunshot wounds, so he should not have gotten far. Search the area and see if you can find a trail. Have someone waiting at nearby hospitals as well. If you can't, do you have any pictures or the person the target was just with? Yes. Send the picture to Bluebird and put out an arrest warrant. If we can't find him, his friends will have to do. Got it, the man answered and closed the phone. But instead of searching for Larry like he had been instructed, the man threw himself on a nearby sofa to recuperate. Aren't we supposed to look for him? The man's partner asked. Are you crazy? What if we actually end up finding him? I don't want to fight that crazy maniac again. Pretty soon, this assignment will be someone else's problem. Make sure to forward the pictures to Bluebird. And check the kid's fridge for some drinks. I could use one about now. The partner breathed a sigh of relief, then walked towards the fridge. As the hours passed by, the other guests noticed that the behavior of the guests from Earth changed dramatically. They had long stopped betting, and none of them were as jovial as before. Soon the Empire got word that a civil war had erupted on Earth. This was bad for them as it would probably affect the number of participants Earth would send to the games. Just as Anthony was about to send someone to the family heads to discuss if their cooperation would be affected, someone by the name of Lee showed up. He introduced himself as a member of the new council that was overlooking Earth. He discussed new terms that were entirely different and less stringent. Anthony didn't care one way or another, but said the agreement would depend on performance. And thus, the soldiers who were participating in the games had switched allegiance, but other than some of their superiors, they had no idea. Eventually, the second match started completely, and was much more intense than the first round. Many of the guests from Earth had stopped watching, as watching such dangerous combat only made them fear what was happening at home. But that did not reduce the number of guests, however, as by now the Empire had distributed the golden keys amongst their staff on all 3 planets in the Vegas system, as well as the natives with a considerable amount of contributions. A large batch of keys was also being sent to the command carrier. So, for the first time in centuries, residents from all 3 planets of the Vegas system had an opportunity to meet. Yet despite their common origin, their societies had developed differently and they did not have much to talk about. The only common thing they shared was that they all thoroughly enjoyed watching zombies die on the big screens. As a result, the Earthlings filled the distant corners of the inn to get away from the noise as they hid and waited for news from home, and the rest filled the Coliseum seats. All of this, accompanying the various army camps, made the inn as crowded as an amusement park. But Lex knew none of this as he slept. But it was not a deep, restful sleep. His body heated up despite the ambient temperature being quite cool, and soon he was covered in sweat. His face was entirely red, and soon, white smoke started coming out of his nose and ears. The smell of something burning filled the air, but no one was around to notice. Along with Lex's sweat, dark-colored filth came out but did not have a chance to accumulate as it was quickly burnt away. Mary watched Lex nervously, unaware if this was a typical reaction to the medicine or if the devils really had done something to it. But whatever the case may be, she could only watch. Things continued like that for nearly 6 hours before Lex finally woke up. He was expecting to feel amazing, which is how he usually felt after getting stronger, but the reality was the exact opposite. Not only did he not feel stronger, Lex felt incredibly weak. He felt wet from all the sweat, but thirsty at the same time. His body felt drained, as if he had starved for days. Water, he murmured to Mary in a hoarse voice, as his mind was currently not clear enough to mentally summon it himself. When he finally started drinking, it was like he was sipping from the well of life. Strength immediately started returning to him, and his mind started clearing up. That's when he noticed that his room looked a little foggy, as if a smoke machine had been running for hours. But he could not mind that as the stench from his own body nearly incapacitated him. He stumbled his way to the restroom where he lay in a tub and turned on the water. It took him nearly an hour more before he finally cleaned up and all his exhaustion left him. "Do you feel better?" Mary asked, now that he was finally recovered. "Can you tell if the medicine worked?" "Not really," Lex said, frowning. "I feel about the same as before I drank it. Let me check my status. Name, Lex Williams. Age, 23. Sex, male. Cultivation level, regal embrace body tempering stage 3. Health, suboptimal, enlarged brain tumor, mild dehydration, mild starvation. Midnight points, 1,331,530. Remarks, occasionally, decent people also brush their teeth after cleaning up with a shower. Just saying. He was happy to see he had earned some more MP while he slept, but there was no information on the status of his soul. Well, at least there was nothing seriously wrong with him except bad breath, apparently. He summoned food directly into his apartment and donned the host attire so he could check up on what had happened at the inn while he was asleep. Immediately, he noticed the massive crowd. Not only were the refugees, which were not too many actually compared to the rest, but new guests piling in from God knows where. Originally, Lex had planned to expand the inn after the games were over. But now it seemed like it was something he could not push off for too long. He did not like the massive crowd. It was also affecting the wildlife that he had at the inn, as all of them had gone to the forest to hide. That's when he noticed the littering. Were people actually littering at his inn? Immediately he passed an order to his guards to clean up, and informed all his staff as well as holograms of a new rule. If someone littered, the first time they would get a warning from the hologram, but the second time onwards they would get a fine. It seemed like it was high time he upgraded the inn and its capabilities. He could not keep waiting for the system to upgrade the inn for him with rewards. He opened the midnight market to check how much it would cost to increase the size of the inn. Considering that the system would literally be creating land out of nothing, the price was a reasonable 100 acres of land for 1 million MP. Lex didn't immediately go for the upgrade, though. He scrolled through all the available options. Buying buildings and A.S was just one aspect of the midnight market. It also provided various other options. One very interesting option that caught Lex's eye was a one-time upgrade to the mystery trial. The upgrade would not benefit the guests, however, as Lex was the intended beneficiary for this upgrade. Since the mystery trial's purpose was to refine the user's strongest skill, the upgrade would allow Lex to add certain search parameters. Whenever a guest would use the mystery trial and their skill fell into one of those parameters, Lex would be notified. This was an excellent way of scouting talents. The upgrade only cost 50,000 MP. Lex bought it without any hesitation and started entering the parameters. The first one he entered was for a chef. The second one was for a musician. If Z were here to watch as Lex kept entering his parameters, he would be reminded of a certain anime about pirates. Why else was he looking for a sharpshooter? No, why else was he searching for a marksman? And a swordsman? And a historian? Even Mary was confused as she watched him enter meteorologist. The climate at the inn was under his control, why did he need a weatherman? Chapter 164 Fruit Knife. In one of the recovery pod rooms, a man and a woman stood across from each other. The woman was glaring at the man, who did not seem to care. No, do it yourself, Sophia finally said. Sophia, don't piss me off. Go bring my mother to the inn, he said sternly. Why do you even care about them? They've used you enough. And even if you care, why should I care? Let them die in the war for all I care. If my mother dies, I'll go down to earth and kill your father. You. Sophia roared, before attacking Marlowe head-on. But her attack came to nothing. There was no loud explosion, no devastating spread of spirit energy, nothing. Her hand was simply stuck in the air right before Marlowe. In his room, Lex was alerted to the outbreak of the fight, but when he checked who it was, he decided to ignore it. He would send Marlowe a bill if anything broke. I've already crossed that realm. You'll have to up your game if you want to continue fighting with me, Marlowe said with a teasing smirk. What? Sophia was stunned, and for a moment, a flash of joy filled her eyes before anger and bitterness clouded them. Finally, instead of saying anything, Sophia disappeared. She had gone back to Earth to invite her mother-in-law. Marlowe took a look at his son, then left the room. He had asked Nurse Jubilation about the details regarding Larry, but due to privacy rules, she told him nothing. Finally, she agreed to have someone inform him once Larry woke up. Satisfied with the result, he finally left the building and located two extremely popular people at the inn. They were not members of the inn staff, no, they were Chen and Lily. After conducting a trade with the Morrison family, they gained enough capital to start their own business back at Vegas Minima. Of course, their interest did not lay in mundane and paltry things such as money, they wanted power and revenge. It just so happened that earning money would make that path easier, so they started a little private business at the inn. They started selling zombie cores. Of course, all trades were conducted through the guild room. Marlowe arrived to see the siblings sitting together watching the match. They were watching the impenetrable Jotun soldiers as they lay siege to the castle. They still had not suffered a single death, it was remarkable. I need zombie cores, Marlowe said, walking up to them. Tier 5 zombie cores, as many as you have. The siblings were startled by the sudden order, then broke out into a grin. They had a big client. I must say, your choices are a little confusing, Mary said as she saw Lex enter a parameter for a detective into the mystery trial. It's to build a reserve of candidates for when we need them. I have an idea for what I want the Midnight Inn to be like. It has to be a lot bigger, and with a lot more services. To be honest, there are hotels even on Earth that can host more guests than us. They have water parks and shopping malls, spas and gyms, and so many more things I can't even imagine. So we have to be open-minded. In fact, I was thinking that after the war on Earth is over, I'd go interview a few hotel managers in Las Vegas and Dubai. Get a little professional with things. Yes, I get that, that is indeed a good idea. What I don't get is, why do you need cosplay enthusiasts? It's complicated, don't worry about it. Alright, said Mary hesitantly. She was really starting to get concerned about how much the tumor was affecting Lex. When Lex finally ran out of ideas for skills to look for, he once again started searching the midnight market for other upgrades. That's when he came across the upgrade for his beloved butter knife. Currently, it was limited to a one-hit kill to anyone at Foundation Realm and below, but that was too weak for Lex now. The upgrade that was available for 100,000 MP was an ingredient that Lex was supposed to dip the knife in. It would then be upgraded to self-defense fruit knife, and would be capable of one-hitting a golden core cultivator. Unfortunately, that was still far from sufficient, but it would do. Once again, Lex did not hesitate and purchased the ingredient, which appeared in front of him, in a neatly wrapped silver cover. On the cover, a few words were printed, "I can't believe it's not butter." Lex chuckled and stabbed the block with the self-defense butter knife. The knife started glowing and completely submerged itself in the block. The process would be complete in a few hours. Just as he was about to spend more time looking at more options, Mary appeared and said, "There are a couple of things that require your attention at the inn." Oh, what happened? First, there is a guest in a recovery pod with a unique constitution. The pod is not able to heal him, and if nothing is done, soon, the guest will die. Second, there is a guest by the name of Miranda who wants to meet you. Both those news took Lex by surprise. It was rare that the RP was unable to heal someone, and would usually be the result of a wound such as that of Raphael. He also had an idea of who Miranda might be. She was one of the representatives that spoke with the family heads. Lex himself had already thought of speaking with her, but he felt that he would not be able to stop himself from asking questions about London. That would not be in line with the persona of the Innkeeper. "I'll check on the RP first," he said, before teleporting directly to the recovery pod in question. He was startled to see an unconscious Larry covered in bullet wounds. He quickly checked Larry's status. Name, Larry Dershaw. Condition: multiple gunshot wounds. Ruptured kidney. Multiple fractures. Crushed knee. Severe blood loss. Blocked blood vessels. Non-organic living tissue damaged. Report: guest has a unique constitution mixing his organic tissue with spiritual metals. The recovery pod is able to aid the body in healing organic matter, but spiritual metal is required to completely heal. Please provide any kind of spiritual metal to facilitate the body's healing. Lex was greatly confused at seeing such a strange requirement, but also relieved that the conditions could be easily met. In fact, he did not even need to go look for spiritual metal elsewhere. He summoned his heavy Harley's magazine and started popping the physical rounds into the recovery pod. By the sixth bullet, the pod no longer needed any more metal and started incorporating the metal into Larry's body. Of course, the useless materials in the bullets were pushed out of the pod. He had only just started relaxing, thinking that the situation on Earth wasn't so bad, and then this happened. His concern for his family came back. Seeing that Larry's condition was stable, Lex left to go see Miranda. It was time to see what this person wanted with him. When he teleported to the garden behind the manor where Miranda was currently sitting, conversing with her partners, he expected to see evil incarnate. He was ready to see the face of someone he would hate. Instead, he saw a pale-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes and a frail voice. Yet despite her seemingly tired state, her clothes were neat and clean, without a single extra crease. He checked her status. Name, Miranda Charles. Age, 31. Sex, female. Cultivation details, Foundation Peak. Midnight and Prestige Level, 1. Condition, severely damaged meridians, unable to cultivate further without treatment. Remarks, a revolutionary with a splash of pumpkin spice. Ignoring the remark that made no sense to him, her damaged meridians may have explained why she was so exhausted despite her deep cultivation. Maybe she was also working a lot. Miranda and her partners were startled by the innkeeper's arrival, but then again, they had been informed that he would join them shortly. Greetings guests, I am the innkeeper. I was informed you were looking for me. I hope you have not found any of our facilities lacking. Not at all sir, not at all, Miranda said, standing up to greet the innkeeper. I hope I am not being rude. I have heard many things about you, and wanted an opportunity to introduce myself, and hope that we may be able to work together in a few endeavors. Miranda was slightly nervous. She had heard many things about the innkeeper, both from the council spies and from the many guests she had met here. The scope of the inn completely overwhelmed her and opened her to a whole new world. It made her realize just how insignificant Earth really was. It also made her realize how much time and potential the 5 families had wasted by stagnating. She would not make the same mistake. She would bring Earth to a new dawn. She did not know that while she was belittling the family heads, they were meeting with Adrian, who was previously the observer assigned to them, and had come with a message from the lady they answered to. Chapter 165 sponsored by Lex, as the innkeeper, maintained a warm smile as he gestured to Miranda to take a seat. Her associates also greeted Lex, but made it clear with their body language that they would leave all the talking to her. So, Miranda, how can I help you? The innkeeper said, taking a seat on a chair he summoned out of thin air. Let me introduce myself first, she said as she fixed her posture, trying to appear as proper as possible despite her apparent exhaustion. My name is Miranda, as you already know, and I am a leading member of the Council of New Order, as well as their Foreign Relations Director. Due to the gross negligence, stagnation of progress and greed of the previous rulers of Earth, we have taken it upon ourselves to lead our planet towards a brighter future. Yes, I am aware, Lex said softly, of the changes happening on Earth. I'm hosting quite a few refugees at my inn at the moment, all escaping from your planet. I heard about that, she said, letting out a defeated and exasperated sigh. I want to thank you for looking out for our citizens. After decades of planning and build-up, we've made the transition of power as peaceful as we possibly could. We have to thank your inn for that as well. Had the family heads not left Earth long enough for us to make preparations, the battle to lure them into a trap would have been extremely bloody. But still, as much as we want things to happen peacefully, not everything goes according to plan. Some disturbances are unavoidable. Still, things should calm down within the week. I, naturally, have no opinion on how you do things on your planet. I am simply running an inn. Lex smiled at her, his warm and calm demeanor relaxing her tense nerves. Then he continued to say, of course, some of my staff members are from Earth. I'm sure they may have some concerns. Who are they? I'll make sure to take special care of them, Miranda replied suddenly, then realized her question might not be completely appropriate. But she, as well as the other guests, could not differentiate between the A.I.S and actual employees. Other than Leo, who obviously ran a gaming den with games from Earth, other employees' origins were a mystery to most. Their identity is their privacy, but I will let them know to contact you if they have concerns. Miranda nodded, as if to assure the innkeeper that she would take the utmost care if any of his employees approached her. While we are still finishing dealing with unstable factors, it is still true that we have assumed control of most of Earth. As such, I was hoping to cooperate with the inn on certain matters. Please elaborate. I will do what I can. The first matter I would like to discuss is if it is possible to ban certain people from entering the inn. There are many criminals and terrorists who have taken advantage of the momentary chaos to wreak havoc, and may escape to the inn. It would be extremely detrimental to everyone if they stay at large. Miss Miranda, that is impossible, Lex replied immediately and firmly. The Midnight Inn is open to all so long as they can pay our nominal charges and adhere to the rules of the inn itself. The inn does not interfere in the civil or political matters of other planets, and will also not adjust its rules according to the wishes of other planets. Just as he finished his small yet clear rejection, a loud crashing noise attracted the duo's attention. They turned to see some guests on the side, ardently watching the second match. The beasts had demolished one of the walls of the castle and were charging in. Blood, fire and chaos filled the screen as various races combated the zombies. Of course, that does not mean the inn will stay unresponsive if antagonized, Lex quickly added. What was an all-out war if not interfering in civil and political matters? He mentally wiped some sweat off his forehead. Miranda was disappointed but not surprised. It took her quite a while to accept the facts when she learned about the inn and other civilizations, but she had adjusted her mentality now and knew that in front of those other giants, Earth was nothing. I understand. Then I would like to move on to my next request. I would like to host an expo at your inn. The culture part of your event already gave a lot of people a preview of Earth, and these games are a good opportunity to show off our military. But I would like to host a more detailed event focusing on everything Earth has to offer in search of anyone who might want to invest in the development of Earth. I was hoping that you would help with spreading invitations to the expo as well. Her request truly took Lex by surprise. He could not believe he had heard correctly, despite the awesome power of the host attire. She was looking for sponsors for Earth? Can you elaborate on what you are trying to achieve? So that I can understand the scope of the event. I've spent some time getting to know some of the guests and the powers behind them at the inn. Giants such as the Empire naturally would not be interested, but I'm sure there are merchants or businesses who would be interested in sponsoring Earth. Of course, we would not be selling equity, but perhaps they may want resources or the labor force or have some manufacturing done on our planet. I'm sure we have something that someone wants. The premise would remain that all cooperation be done via the inn. We would never invite danger to our planet for some profit. I've prepared a rough list of the kinds of things we would be willing to accept as sponsorships. With that she handed Lex a document listing, in great detail and with much specificity, the kinds of things Miranda wanted. In the end, the document also stated that they would be open to receiving other offers. If nothing else, at least this woman was well organized. There would be no issue in holding such an event, but it would have to wait till the midnight games are over. I can start advertising for your event as soon as you submit a down payment. My suggestion, however, is that you wait till you have a complete grasp on your planet before you do any such thing. It would be embarrassing if interested parties arrive to attend, but you are not in a condition to host. Of course, we would also need to take of many things on our end to host such an event if we want to display our best attributes. Now that I know such an option is available, I will begin work on it as soon as I return. Was that everything, or did you have more things you wanted to discuss? Just a few more things, if you have the time. I wanted. The meeting with Miranda truly went on much longer than Lex expected. But as much as he disliked her for helping to start the war, he truly did benefit from meeting with her. She bought 50,000 bottles of Botlam Dew, 10,000 bath towels, removes negative statuses such as poison, paralysis paste, petrification, tracking powder, bad makeup etc., and 1,000 travel face wash kits. For a moment, Lex was afraid he might run out. Fortunately, he did not, as there seemed to be no limit on purchases for these items. The profit from one bottle of dew was 120 MP and 100 MP each for the other items. This one transaction netted Lex 7,100,000 MP. But the joy from the sale was mired by the knowledge that these items were going to the council. After the meeting ended, Lex checked to see how the game was going. It was almost the end as a wolf, Alexander and Kara together besieged Pramod. Without the advantage of endless spiritual energy, fighting the demon was a lot more difficult. It did not help that the technique given by the Empire did not do as much damage as they had promised. They'll manage, Lex told himself as he returned to his room to continue his expansion plan for the inn, completely missing the moment Pramod finally activated his invincibility. The demon allowed himself to be attacked by the wolf freely before grabbing its neck and breaking it in one swift motion. Wasting no time, the demon grabbed a lance that had fallen on the ground nearby and stabbed towards Alexander. The demon's movements were too swift and his total lack of care for defending against any attacks put the two humans at a disadvantage. Alexander tried to dodge but was unable, and the lance pierced through his stomach and pinned him to the ground. The teenager yelled in pain, but did not stop for even a second and pushed his body forward to escape the lance going through his body from the other end. Pramod attacked again with endless savagery in his eyes, but suddenly Kara appeared before him and parried his attack. Since the demon was immune to attacks, she did not attack and only defended. Fortunately she was able to buy Alexander the time he needed to free himself, but now he was wounded and bleeding, and Pramod was invincible. Things did not look good. Chapter 166 Midnight Mountain. The demon grinned at Kara and the teenager, then turned around and sprinted away. Both of them were confused as to why the demon left when it had such an advantage, but given the situation, they were relieved. Alexander was exhausted from the long siege and almost drained of all his spirit energy, relying mostly on his impressive body cultivation. This was an opportunity for him to retreat. Kara, on the other hand, was now free from distractions and ran towards a corridor leading to the chamber with the note in it. It was defended by zombies, of course, but so long as they were not as difficult to deal with as Pramod, she would end this match in a few minutes. But while they were celebrating, they did not realize that the reason Pramod left them was because he did not take them too seriously. His real goal was the main Jotun force which was nearby. With his invincibility running out, he found his way to the main force and rammed through all of their attacks to reach the center of their ranks. Then, he withdrew the cursed Kaebli heart and crushed it, releasing black toxic juices and fumes. Then, before his invincibility ran out, Pramod quickly escaped. He did not bother looking back at the effects of the artifact that he used, but he knew it would do sufficient damage. The Midnight Games automatically prevented him from bringing in any artifacts at a level greater than what a Foundation expert could use, so it was not enough to destroy the whole army, but it would do its job. For the first time since the game started, the Empire suffered its first casualty. Then its second. As the numbers started to climb up, Pramod did not look back. A few minutes later, Kara managed to destroy the node with the help of a few beasts and the match was over. The Empire's doctors ran to diagnose their soldiers, but the damage was terrifying. Those that did not immediately die seemed crippled. On Earth, yet another council meeting was being held. But this time, instead of an underground bunker, they were holding their meeting in the UN office in Geneva. The holograms did not hide the members' identities, and no one was using voice modulators. Despite its public location, the meeting was a private one with almost full attendance of the council members. Among the council members, there was a distinction in importance, with 5 members having greater authority than the rest, but even the lesser members had a voice here. They had to, otherwise how would they fulfill their ambitions? Currently, they were hearing about the situation in Africa, which was the most stable continent in the world at the moment. The transition of power was as smooth as silk and any opposition had been diplomatically convinced to change their stance, much to the disappointment of a few warlords. After this would be Miranda's turn, and everyone was looking forward to the new opportunity she represented. Originally, a lot of members were against her joining the council as she had no real power to bring, but her ingenuity won them over. She could turn any situation to her advantage, and they were now ready to see what advantages she had brought this time. But the situation suddenly changed when a floating woman appeared in midair. She gave off no aura, so they were not able to tell what level she was at, but getting past so many people and suddenly appearing in front of them was no small feat. "So this is the Council of New Order," she said with a look of derision. "Such a stupid name, how do you bring yourselves to keep it?" "Who are you?" one of the holograms suddenly roared. The guards in the room suddenly pointed their guns at her, but then froze. They had lost control of their bodies. The woman looked at the hologram that screamed at her, then appeared in front of it. She grabbed the hologram by the throat, as if it were a real entity, and lifted it. But somehow, despite how bizarre her actions were, the hologram was lifted into the air, the man clawing at his throat as if to free her hand. "My name is Fernanda, and I have a message for you all, so you better listen silently." She turned to look at the members in the eyes and saw a lot of panic, but she also saw a lot of calm faces. "My lady, in her everlasting benevolence, has decided not to interfere in your actions. Since you are the people of Earth, and you all want a change in the way things are done, she has allowed you this modicum of control over your fates." Fernanda's voice was full of disgust and hate, not because her mistress felt that way, but because letting such major changes occur on Earth was a failure on her part. She had looked like a fool in front of her mistress, and wished she could tear the council apart. But of course, she knew better than to do that. "But there are things you need to understand. The Earth, the Moon, the planets that orbit the Sun and even the star itself, all of these were a betrothal gift from the young master to the mistress. Since you want change, you can have it. Since you want to reveal cultivators to the public, you may. Since you have ambitions that reach the stars, then reach for them. In how you choose to lead the planet, she will not control you, as she did not control your predecessors. But know that everything you do is with the permission of the mistress, and if you cross her line, then a wave of a hand is all it will take to replace you." Fernanda waved her hand and suddenly every member of the council felt themselves choking. The feeling lasted barely a moment, but it was real enough to remember. "You have 1 week, you better end your wars within this period. The mistress does not like it when innocents are involved, so don't involve any civilians in the rest of your actions. Settling personal vendettas is acceptable during this period, but there should be no genocide. Remember, the Earth is her gift, so you should not even dream of marring its beauty. Does anyone have any questions?" Dead silence filled the room as everyone stared at the angry woman. It seemed no one had the courage to do anything else. Just as she got ready to leave, though, one of the men sitting at the head table stood up. "Miss Fernanda, it is a pleasure to meet you," the middle-aged man said, his voice as smooth and alluring as a radio show host. "My name is Bernard Brown. I do have some questions, I hope you do not mind answering." Fernanda glared at him, clearly upset that he spoke up, but she could not continue to ignore her duties. "I've seen you before, you're that Sam's kid." "Sure, ask away." "Grandchild, actually," he corrected her with a smile, as if he was not admitting to planning parricide. "Thank you for humoring me. Would it be alright if I asked more about this, mistress?" The meeting took a very sharp turn from what everyone had expected. Back in his room, Lex finalized his expansion plans. With 8,281,530 MP available to him, there were many things he could do now. No longer delaying the matter, Lex spent 5 million MP on increasing the size of the inn by 500 acres. There were no massive earthquakes or mystical indications. At a moment's notice, the boundary wall of the inn expanded out and new land filled in the space. If all that land had been added to one corner instead of the boundaries, it would have been more noticeable, but this would do. Behind the hills upon which stood the meditation hall, Lex raised a mountain that could rival Everest, its peak going high up into the clouds. The singular mountain was nothing but one massive, pointy rock, so Lex added layers of extremely fertile, volcanic soil. Then came a layer of fresh, powdered snow. With another wave of his hand, thousands of coniferous trees started sprouting and in the blink of an eye grew. Like Salt Bay, he sprinkled his hands over the projection of the mountain, and various animals fell from the sky and into the new forests, somehow completely unhurt. He paused, looked at the projection, and suddenly came up with another idea. He cleared one corner of the mountain with a wave of his hand, as if he were photoshopping an image instead of an actual mountain, then dotted it with only a few obstacles. This would be a ski slope. Turning back to the other parts of the mountain, he carved out some trails for guests to climb. Naturally, he made sure to add some extremely scenic spots for the climbers to rest or camp, and added a fair share of small ledges for lovers to sit on and whisper corny lines to one another. Alright, a part of him was still just thinking of those two teenagers who came to the inn for a date. But he was not done. With the trails carved out, he then planned for the adventurous types, who went where no path led. He filled the mountain with secret caves and tunnels. He hid simple and tiny gifts, such as botlamdu, a few suits and more, in various corners of the mountain in small chests. He would not tell anyone about these, and the guests would have to stumble into them. He spent a good while perfecting the mountain, or Midnight Mountain as it would eventually be called, completely unaware that all the guests in the inn stood and watched in awe as a mountain appeared out of thin air, and then kept changing, as if being played with by a god. Chapter 167 of Alon. Let alone the earthlings and the beasts, even Anthony stood in awe. The moment the expansion started, he was startled and sent someone to summon Ragnar. This was thoroughly beyond his scope of understanding, despite his own background. Loretta watched silently from the window of her room, the mysterious man saying nothing as he saw the changes. Unlike the rest, he was not concerned about the rising mountain and expanding land. His mind was still on that one lapse in behavior the innkeeper had displayed. Right now, he was only waiting. He had sent some devils to go and investigate the farthest reaches of the known universe. Something had to have startled the innkeeper, and he needed to know what it was. In the greenhouse, the galactic sovereign turtle turned its head towards the mountain, and then once again shook its head. These were not the kind of trees perfect for such an environment. He'd better go take a look. Little Blue happily followed the turtle, treating it like its father. The gardener, who was still plowing the land, was completely oblivious to changes since his sight was focused on the ground. Crowds started to gather as they stared up into the skies. Children stopped playing. The gamblers who were wincing at their losses or laughing at their winnings paused to admire the magnificent beauty. But because the mountain was so large and evident, they missed the other changes taking place around the inn. Once Lex was satisfied with the mountain, for now, he turned his attention to the next big change he was planning. He turned to the small lake in front of the recovery room and plucked it from the ground, like a piece of Lego. He brought it to the edge of the inn behind the recovery room, and placed it against the wall. Then, as if he were zooming into a picture, he stretched the projection of the lake. But the projection did not zoom in, instead, the lake became bigger. He pushed the lake in to make it much, much deeper, and then dipped the boundary wall into the lake. Now it seemed like the boundary wall was running through a much larger lake, splitting off a portion of it for the inn to enjoy. In its deepest part, the lake could easily accommodate beasts even several times the size of a blue whale. At first he considered covering the lakeside with sand, like a beach, but decided against it. Lex didn't like sand. It was coarse and rough and irritating, and it got everywhere. Instead, he left the grass. In a corner of a lake, he built a small pier with a dozen or so rowing boats, and nearby created a refreshment stand. He bought a couple more A.I.S. to take care of the boats and refreshment, then turned his attention back to the lake. The lake was made of fresh water, and looked so clear that one could barely tell there was water even there. In a certain corner of the lake he added some corals, then dropped in various small fish. He knew nothing about fish other than how to eat them, so he took the ones that were the smallest sizes and dropped a bunch of them in. They would develop their own ecosystem, probably. He didn't want to add plants underwater, because when he imagined himself swimming in a lake, he hated the plants that would get stuck on his feet. Then he turned to the forest surrounding the greenhouse. He moved that all the way back to the edge once again, but built a buffer forest in front of it that guests would have to cross to reach the array. He built a few regular rooms near the front of the woods, but changed their appearance to small wooden cabins that looked like they were made of wood from the nearby trees. Of course, then he added a few courtyards and converted them into larger, more sophisticated wooden cabins. It then occurred to him he could do the same on the mountain. He shaved out one small corner of the mountain and flattened the land, just enough to fit in 2 small cabins and 1 big one. Between the 3 houses, he built a bonfire pit, a drywood shed, and another shed with supplies for homemade hot chocolate. Then he did something similar by the lakeside. He did not add too many rooms because he did not like crowding, but just a few were not an issue. These few changes just covered the edges of the inn. There was a lot of land in the middle to fill as well. But he did not feel like randomly dropping houses or decorations. He needed to think about what he would do to use the area, without making a mess of it. There was, however, one thing he did have an idea for. He increased the distance between Midnight Manor and Main Street, then built a modest 40-story high-rise on the street. With 5 rooms on each floor, other than the first floor and top floor, that made 190 rooms. He turned the entire top floor into a penthouse, and the ground floor there was a marquee, a few restaurants and the lobby. Such a large building obviously warranted a lot more staff, so he hired 50 more AI and after consulting with her, made Velma in charge of all staff. Lex breathed out an exhausted sigh. He'd suddenly made so many changes in one day, and while he had more ideas, he decided to slow down first. He would see how guests responded to these changes, take care of and fix any issues that may rise up, and then continue his expansion. He eyed the high-rise, and it occurred to him that this would likely be hosting more guests than his manor, and that he would need to name it. Resisting the urge to slap the name Midnight Tower onto it, Lex actually spent a little time thinking about it. It was his first high-rise, and represented his first changes to the inn that he did himself without the prompting of the system. It kind of went against what he had been wanting, which was to avoid the vibe of New York, but with literally thousands of people in his grounds, he needed a solution. It meant a lot to him, and so the name should be special. At the same time, Lex felt that if he named it completely randomly, that would be hilarious. Unable to decide, he looked to Mary and said, "Give the building a name." "Me?" she asked, surprised. "You want me to name the building?" "Yeah, why not? You've helped me so much, you should get some credit." "Or do you think I should just name it Mary Tower?" he asked with a modest smirk. Unexpectedly, the tiny, floating woman did not react to his joke. She was silent for a few minutes before she finally said, "Name the tower, Avalon." "It sounds nice." "Good name," Lex simply commented, before the name Avalon was spelled out on the front of the tower. The letters that spelled it out were magical, in that anyone who saw them would see them in their native tongue. This was not directed towards making them understand, the inn's translation system would handle that. It was focused on evoking feelings of nostalgia and closeness. Anyone who would see it would be reminded of home. "It looks nice," she said, her gaze falling softly on the name. Lex did not notice any peculiarity, his focus was on other things. This little show of power should be enough to build him some more prestige. It was time to meet Miranda again, but as Leo. Yet when he scanned the inn with his mind to look for her, she wasn't there. He was completely unaware that she had left right after her meeting with him, and missed out on his magnificent performance. Lex grunted, and instead decided to go meditate and regulate his mood. He also asked Mary to let him know the moment Miranda or any of her 2 followers returned, as Lex wanted to meet with them, but did not notice that the floating woman did not respond. Soon, he had lost himself trying to meditate, while Mary remained hovering in the air, looking at Avalon. "It is a good name," she finally uttered, agreeing with Lex, then disappeared. With both Lex and Mary preoccupied, they missed the scene when Z excitedly dragged Gerard into the gamer's den and started up an anime called Initial B, an anime filled with mountain racing. Nobody saw the dangerous gleam in Z's eyes, and they missed the burning passion in Gerard's as well. Behind Gerard stood his fleet of golf cart drivers, no longer dressed in the formal attire of the inn. No, these AIS were wearing leather jackets and jeans, with hairstyles that defied physics. Z was the one who recommended the styles, and Harry was the one who brought the boy's vision to life. "The trail is not built for vehicles, we'll never be able to do it," one of Gerard's followers said to the old man. "Do not doubt my skills," the old man said, a silver light flashing in his eyes. It had been a long time since Lex checked up on his workers, but if he had paid even a little attention to them, he would have noticed that Gerard was already in the chi training realm, and had awoken special powers. Chapter 168 Missing. Full of determination, Gerard watched a few episodes of Initial B and then walked out. Waiting for him on the street was an old lady with a small child in her hand. She was one of the guests, and had taken a liking to being driven around by Gerard, despite the fact that her chi training cultivation allowed her to be fit enough to get around on her own. "Thank you for waiting, mademoiselle," Gerard said to the lady. She had insisted that was how Gerard should address her. Were Gerard familiar with the cultures of Earth, he would have picked up on the fact that such an address was typically for unmarried women, and then may have wondered why the lady made a point to let him know. But since he was unfamiliar, he did not respond. The lady, however, was undeterred. She was not beyond being more forward if she needed to be. It was no trouble at all. Are we all set? Indeed, mademoiselle, we are. Please, climb aboard my barouche landau, and I shall take you to your destination. Barouche landau is what she called his golf cart, and eventually Gerard started copying her. He helped the lady climb into the golf cart and, once he settled them in, sat on the driver's seat. A silver light shone in his eyes when he grabbed onto the steering wheel, and a similar silver light coated the tires. Releasing a handbrake that should not have existed on a golf cart, Gerard accelerated at speeds that rivaled a regular car. With the wind flowing through his silver hair and the melodic laughter of a femme fatale accompanying him, Gerard was ready to drive fast and drive furiously. Lex ended his meditation after nearly an hour, but there was no update. He did some exercise, ate some food, took another shower, and did everything else he could think of to fill the time, but neither Miranda nor anyone else that followed her came back to the inn. At this point, Lex was nearing his limits of self-control. He decided to go to sleep, and if they did not appear by morning, then he would go find someone else to help him check up on his family. Reason told him he should not connect anyone to his Leo identity as it would be dangerous for him in the future, but he no longer cared. In truth, the distraction from worrying about his own family was causing him to miss out on many things. He missed Ragnar coming back to the inn, and hearing about the changes that had happened before his eyes. He also missed Ragnar telling Anthony that they had new orders and would be leaving the Vegas system right after this war and that someone else would take over. He missed the increasing number of devils who were coming and going from the inn. Many of them were reporting to the mysterious devil accompanying Loretta, but many of them came randomly from unknown places. Unaware or uncaring of the things that happened before, many of those devils caused multiple problems. Well, they tried to cause problems. When Lex's guards took care of matters, they would stop and detail the devils because Lex had ordered them not to kill. In the one instance Lex's bodyguard had to step in, he destroyed the devil's soul and handed the body over to the sovereign galactic turtle. Unexpectedly, the bodyguard and the turtle had developed a good friendship. That did not present a long-term solution to the number of devils entering the inn, however. One may wonder why so many devils were coming in. The truth was, the devils had access to teleportation portals that could not be replicated by the Jotun Empire. Using those portals, they could travel far and wide, which is how they managed all their various demon farms. As a result of those portals, the golden keys had been spread far and wide across the universe already, though not all demons understood the perceived background of the inn. Lex also missed all the joy of his guests. He missed the beasts diving into the lake and relaxing. He missed the students from the academy climbing up Midnight Mountain and having a snowball fight. He missed the coalition of mothers who often followed Z around, introducing the boy to their own kids, who had also finally entered the inn. He missed the moment when all the new rooms he'd built were promptly occupied. He'd missed the moment when John exited the mystery trial for the third time, suffering from rapid mood swings, going from depressed to frustrated and back. Most importantly, he missed the moment when Larry finally woke up. It was safe to say that there were numerous things that Lex was unaware of that he would have thoroughly enjoyed, but until this ordeal passed, he would not be able to focus. The next morning, the first thing he did when he woke up was scan the inn for Miranda. Unfortunately, she was not there. Then he made a list of anyone he could potentially ask a favor from. As much as he would have liked to ask the Morrisons for help, it seemed like they were not on good terms with the council and we wanted to avoid any unnecessary trouble. Eventually, his sight landed on Will Bentham. The old man had come to the inn in a wheelchair, but was now well on his way to good health. He had started cultivating again, and despite all the time he spent relaxing at the inn, he was also a dedicated businessman. In fact, currently, he was having a meeting with some members of the Rose Society. His bodyguard, who had stopped appearing for a while, was also back. He listened in to their meeting for a moment, and when he discovered they were in a good mood, decided that things had not turned out badly for them during the worldwide revolution. Putting on his glasses that disguised him as Leo, Lex decided to teleport directly outside Will's courtyard and knocked. Hugo, Will's bodyguard, opened the door and was surprised to see Leo. He, like many other people, had memorized the faces of some of the prominent inn employees. This Leo, who rarely appeared, had been titled one of the more mysterious ones. "Excuse me for bothering you, my name is Leo and I run the Gamer's Den. Is it possible for me to meet with Mr. Will?" "Yes, come in. I'll let him know you're here." Hugo guided Lex to an empty room and then hurried away to let Will know about the unexpected guest. He could have directly taken Leo to the old man, but he had a feeling that the young man wanted a private meeting, which was indeed the case. Barely a minute later, the old man walked in with a warm smile and seemingly genuine delight. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Leo got directly to the point. "Mr. Will, it's slightly embarrassing for me to find you like this, but I had an urgent situation and wondered if you might be able to help me." "Please, speak freely," Will said. Though Leo surely tried to hide it, as someone who was great in social situations, Will could immediately identify the various indicators of extreme anxiety. From the constantly fidgeting fingers, shaking leg, to the hurried speech and eyes that kept scanning the room, Leo had them all. He couldn't believe his luck that an employee actually came to him for help. If he was able to do this, even if he got nothing in return, at least his relationship with the innkeeper should improve, right? I am aware that you come from Earth. I have a, let's say, friend on Earth who is extremely concerned about his family. If you could somehow help him get in contact with them, or reach them, I would greatly appreciate it. I will remember this favor. Transporting your friend will not be an issue at all. Where is he, and where does he need to go? From New York to London, he answered. Extremely simple, consider the matter done. He took a piece of paper and wrote down a phone number. Have your friend call this number and let the driver pick him up. I will arrange everything else. Thank you, Mr. Will. I will give this to him straight away. Please, just call me Will. Such a small matter is not even worth calling a favor. It is my pleasure to be able to help you out. Thank you, Leo said, this time a little more heartfelt. I won't forget this. Without extending his stay, Leo left the courtyard, and then teleported back to his room. He was so excited, he completely did not pick up on Will's excitement. Lex wasted no time and returned to Earth, and dialed the number he was given. I was given this number by Will, he told me to have you pick me up, he said, finally relaxing a little now that things were finally in motion. Though, he still had his armor underneath his clothes and the heavy Harley hidden. Half an hour later, he was sitting in a black car with tinted windows on his way to the airport. He did not notice that along the way, his phone ran out of battery, but even if he did he would not have been surprised. He spent very little time on Earth lately and hadn't charged his phone in a long time. 15 minutes after he had left, several Bluebird agents appeared near the area where he had called from. Target has disappeared and his phone can no longer be traced, one of the agents reported on a call. Can you trace the person he called? It was a private number, we can't trace it. Keep searching. The target is reusing his regular phone number, so that likely means he still does not know he is being tracked. As soon as he shows back up on the grid, I want him detained. Understood. Chapter 169 Growing Up. I just got word, the plane has taken off and is on its way to London, one of Will's assistants said. We followed all the instructions you gave, there weren't any issues. Bluebird agents here, and the Royal Guard agents in the UK will all look the other way to any people getting on or off. Good, that will be all, Will said, as he finally let himself lean back into his chair. It had not even been an hour since Leo came to him looking for the favor, but he had handled it well. Most importantly, no one other than him knew anything about the details of their conversation, and he had kept strict control on information about the passenger as well. Even he himself did not know anything about Leo's friend that was traveling in his private plane. The driver that drove that passenger to the airport had been administered with a spirit disruption pill. It was not something that was harmful, but would cause the driver to forget everything that had happened during the past few days. It had no long-term harmful effects, unless it was used frequently, and the driver was well compensated for it. The pilot for the private jet and anyone else who had been in contact with the friend would undergo the same procedure. Will was documenting all of this and would submit a report about it to Leo before even he himself would take one of those pills. One would think that by causing him to forget the details of what happened, Will would be losing out on the value of the favor. The truth was to the contrary. As a man of the world, Will knew exactly how to ingratiate himself to people in power, and by doing all of this he would show the innkeeper, or at least Leo, that he was someone reliable, so that in the future if they ever needed help, they would come to him. He did not fear them coming to him for help repeatedly, what he feared was them having no use for him at all. As long as he was reliable, he had great value. As long as he was valuable, he would be taken care of. This was the fundamental difference between Will and all his partners in the Rose Society. Since the Council had taken over Earth, they had contacted Will and many of his partners to acquire resources from them. So while the whole world destabilized, not only did Will and his partners excel, the Council was heavily investing in their operations to help them grow. Of course, the Rose Society itself was still a hidden organization and no one knew that all of these influential people from across the world were actually partners. That was the primary reason they were able to attract so much business. The Council's agenda was to break up the monopoly held by certain groups that had previously been supported by the family heads. What they did not know was that they were, inadvertently, setting up another monopoly. All of that was a matter for the future. What mattered now was that while his partners were indulging in their own success and celebrating, Will did not let success blind him. He was already making plans for what to do if he fell out of grace with the Council by developing relations with the Midnight Inn. Slowly, Will was returning to his former glorious self, before he was struck with a nearly crippled body, and as his cultivation progressed and he regained his vigor, he would one day surpass his old self. Lex felt his thoughts wander as he sat in the private jet. This was the first time he sat on a private plane, but even with all the privilege it afforded, he did not think his experience was the norm. He didn't even have any documents on him, no one asked for ID or a passport, he was directly escorted to the plane that was waiting for him on the empty runway. Like most other people, he hated the extreme privilege of the rich and powerful. But he also had to admit, the sofas on this private jet felt incredible. As he waited in the plane, and his thoughts wandered, it occurred to him that he could still be transported to the inn from the plane. If he teleported to the inn right now, when he teleported back, would he still be in the plane, or would he reappear in the space the plane was in when he left? He asked Mary, who responded immediately. Isn't it obvious? You'll reappear in the plane. If the inn used absolute positioning for teleportation, then if you stayed in the inn for a few days and reappeared, you'd be in space because your planet would have already moved away from that space that it occupied when you left. Right, of course, he said, thinking it made sense. Yet he still had a few more hours to burn and he didn't feel tired enough to nap, so he continued to have the randomest of thoughts. Hey, what if I get a guest that's microscopic? How will I see it? What if someone has a baby at the inn? Does the baby get special privileges? What do I do if someone I know comes as a guest? What if it's someone I hate, do I still need to be nice to them? Where do the items I buy from the system come from? Is there someone called Botlam whose due we are stealing? Where do the ADADADAs come from? Does the system just make them out of nothing? Or does the basement have a creepy basement somewhere full of bodies to fit AI into? Lex kept asking questions, but never really gave Mary any time to answer. Eventually, after the longest 7 hours of Mary's short life, they landed in Heathrow Airport. Before they landed, Lex looked out the window to see how the city looked. It was difficult to tell from so high up, but he didn't see any explosions, so that was nice. After landing in the unusually empty airport, Lex was once again escorted to a private car. When asked where he wanted to get dropped, Lex pulled out his phone where he had saved his family's address, to finally realize it was dead. Fortunately, after a couple minutes of trying to remember, Lex was able to recall the general area where they lived and told the driver. He'd be able to walk to his parents' house once he was close enough. As they drove by, they passed through various security checks conducted by heavily armed guards. After a very long time, Lex once again pulled out an item that would help him identify anything he missed. He put on the fancy monocle. Immediately he was informed that all of these guards were equipped with spirit weapons, not just regular guns, and many of them had various spirit tech on them. Lex's war was being checked for weapons and explosives using some devices the monocle was able to identify, which gave Lex a small heart attack. He had the heavy Harley on him. But it seemed like they did not care much for a single sidearm and let the car pass. The city, while unable to match the regular energy New York had somehow managed to retain, was still quite busy. People could be seen walking around in small groups, keeping mostly to themselves. At least the city wasn't deserted. This gave him no small amount of relief, since this most likely meant his family was also alright. Eventually, after getting dropped off, he walked the familiar path home. When he was growing up, his family never had a fixed home as they traveled a lot globally. His parents were fans of such a lifestyle, and the kids learned to love it as well. It was only after Lex left for higher education, while throwing a tantrum that his parents weren't letting them live normal lives, that his parents got this home in London. They still traveled a lot, but at least his sisters could stay in one place for high school and university. He had 3 sisters. His elder sister, Belle, was the complete opposite of her name. She was cold and aggressive, and liked to do things her own way. When they were kids growing up, she used to wrestle with Lex a lot. He was not embarrassed about the fact that he never won. Anyone who knew her knew that maniac could not be completed with. But despite all that, in her own way, Belle took good care of her younger siblings. After Belle, Lex was born, and after him came his younger sister Liz, followed by the baby of the family, Moon. Moon was not actually a baby anymore, she was 16, or 15, or something along those lines, but as the youngest, she was spoiled by everyone. Not just the parents, even all the siblings spoiled little Moon. Her nickname Moon originated from Lex's father promising to gifting the moon to her. To this his mother replied that the man had given her the same promise. Before the embarrassed man could defend himself, little Moon fell in love with the promise and kept ranting about it to everyone. Liz, who along with Lex formed the duo of middle children, was by far the most normal of all the siblings. She loved and hated her family, depending on the mood, loved making friends, loved traveling the world, and at one point declared she wanted to go to France and fall in love. Anytime she mentioned wanting to fall in love, Belle would beat her up. Lex found it hilarious, but of course, as the victim of many beatings himself, never intervened. Lost in his thoughts, Lex found himself in front of a small house far out in the suburbs. There was enough room for one car in the driveway, and the house itself, despite its ground and first floor, looked extremely cramped. Yet this was home. And the front door of his home was broken, kicked in, by the look of it. Lex's face darkened as he pulled out the heavy Harley. Chapter 170 Assistant to the Mayor. The third midnight game started in a heavy mood. Not only was the location a desert, a sandstorm was raging. There was no visibility and no way for Alexander to deploy his satellite in this weather. That was not to mention that he wasn't fully recovered from his previous wound. To top it all off, in the surprise attack Pramod had pulled off on the Jotun soldiers with the curse, over 300 of them had died and 800 of them were critically injured. Crawford, 41, was also amongst the soldiers that died. The only slightly positive thing was that Pramod no longer joined the games and had left already. Find shelter, Alexander said to his few over 600 remaining soldiers. Too many of them had been critically injured and could no longer fight for now. We're going to hunker down and wait this one out. Alexander felt it was unfortunate that he had to avoid fighting today. He would lose his lead in points over Kara, but it was better than being reckless. But while the Empire and the Earthlings had suffered greatly, the beasts took this opportunity to gain some points. Their performance had not been the best, but the difficult environment for humans posed no problems to them. The tournament was far from over. On Earth, the council was having yet another meeting. All the participating members were in a grave mood. Just a short while ago, they were celebrating their grand victory and subsequent freedom, only to be brought to heel by some mysterious mistress and her secretary Fernanda. It was fortunate that she didn't have many requirements, only that civilians remain uninvolved in the conflict and to avoid major damage to the Earth. The good news was, upon being given the ultimatum, they had responded quickly and eliminated those that could be, or made deals with those that could not be. According to the latest report, last night South Korea launched a surprise attack on the North. Within a single night they took over the country. Their attack was extremely precise and calculated, as if they had been preparing for this for a long time. We just received a missive from them. Starting today, there will no longer be a South or North Korea, only a single Korea. They've agreed to join the council so long as they can rule without any external interference. We've gone over a preliminary list of rules they plan to implement and have no issues, so expect one of their members to join us soon. The issue about Japan, however, remains. We've lost all contact from all of our agents, and we're not the only ones who've suffered as such. The entire country seems to have stopped all external communications. We're preparing a diplomatic envoy to go and meet with their leaders, but just to be safe, I want a Foundation Realm expert on the team. Is there anything else on the agenda we need to discuss? The room was silent, and no one answered Bernard, who had been speaking. Aware of everyone's mood, he smiled and said, "No need to be upset, my friends. This is not a bad thing. Previously, we were going to look towards the Midnight Inn to fuel our progress, but now we know that we have some kind of backing in this vast universe. In a week's time, we will meet Fernanda again, and then we can discuss the future of Earth. We are no longer limited to a single star system, and grander horizons await us." His words seemed to lift spirits, but only Bernard knew what he was thinking behind his warm, hazel eyes. Lex did not rush into the house, but walked with quiet and steady steps. When he reached the door he paused to check for any sounds coming from the house, but there were none. He looked at the broken door and saw the imprint of a shoe embedded dead center. The door had broken along with the hinges. Such a kick could not have been delivered by an ordinary person. Tightening his grip on his gun, Lex slowly entered the house, careful not to step on anything that would make any sound. He ignored the stairs leading upstairs and walked past to check the ground level first. The kitchen was at the far end of the corridor, the living room to the right, and a bathroom under the stairs. Just as he entered the living room to check it out, the cold, hard barrel of a gun pressed firmly against the side of his head. Lex froze, suddenly caught by surprise by how quietly and calmly the attack had caught him. Before he could make any plans or try anything though, a familiar, cold voice started to harshly scold him. "What are you doing, walking around with a gun? Watched too many movies, have you?" Relief flooded through Lex's veins as he recognized Belle's voice and turned to look at his elder sister. It was not a gun she was holding up to his forehead, but the front of an unusually shaped candle stand. His own imagination had done the job of mistaking it for a weapon. "Belle, I'm so glad you're all right," he said, taking a step back to get a good look at his sister. She did not look hurt or harmed at all, and was dressed extremely formally. Behind her, Lex could see an open laptop and several documents. It seemed like she had been working when he came in. "Why would I not be all right? You think everyone is as incompetent as you? I saw the broken door, I thought that." Yes, the broken door. "That gave Little Moon quite the scare," she said, her voice seemingly still as cold and even as before. Only someone who grew up with her could pick up the trace of concern in that voice. Since you're here with a gun, I'm guessing you already know about the situation. Yeah, there's a war. Yes, a war. But it's very different from normal wars. They're not targeting cities or civilians, only the top brass. Well, that has nothing to do with me. The only reason we're even slightly involved was because I recently started a job in the municipal government. I had been having meetings with a few people of interest to the council, and they were checking to see if I was harboring anyone. Wait, you know about the council? Lex asked, surprised. The only reason he knew about the council was because of the inn. How did his sister know? Yes. They're very reasonable people. After I pointed out the flaws in a number of their plans while they were interrogating me, they hired me. If things go according to plan, I should be assigned assistant to the new acting mayor of London by the end of the month. What? What? You're working for the council? Yes, they were very impressed with me, Belle said in a bland voice. Instead of an assistant, I might have become the new acting mayor directly if I was a cultivator. According to their new policy, only cultivators can hold important government positions like that. Wait, you know about cultivators? Lex asked, even more surprised this time. Zero? Instead of answering him though, Belle only let out an exasperated sigh. Do you have a list of things I shouldn't know about? Can we go over it right now? I hate having to repeat myself. No, that's not what I meant, just that I only learned about cultivators myself recently as well. But now that you know, it's great. I won't need to bother explaining it to you. Do you have cultivation techniques? If you don't, I can find some for you guys. Don't bother with that, tell me first, are you ill? You don't look so good. Lex was startled by her sudden question. As far as he knew, his tumor had not affected his appearance at all, but before he could answer, Lex fell limp to the ground, unconscious. Belle did not bother to stop his fall. With his constitution, he would be all right. It was his soul she was concerned about. Taking a silver pen out of her pocket, she twisted the cap, shooting a ray of energy at Lex that covered his entire body. Since Belle did not know what secrets Lex had, she did not want to take any risks and completely blocked out all of his senses. Even Mary, who was connected to Lex by the system, did not notice his condition as her focus was diverted towards managing the inn. Moon, get down here. Check Lex's soul, it's extremely unstable. The teenager who had been spying on her siblings was startled when she heard her elder sister and quickly came towards Lex. I can't use my abilities like this. I need to connect to the relay station and establish a connection with my main body. Then why are you still standing here? Belle asked, her voice still cold and bland. But little Moon picked up the impatience in her voice and quickly ran before Belle got angry. Chapter 171. No plot holes here. Moon ran to her room and retrieved a pair of bangles and what looked like a VR headset. Alone, none of these items were anything special, but when worn together, they connected the wearer's consciousness to something called a relay station, a small base hidden in space somewhere within the solar system. Although Lex's family on Earth were clones of his original family, that did not mean they were connected to the main consciousness of the original body. If the distance between the clone and the original was small enough, they would be, but in the case of interstellar distances, it was all but impossible. The relay station allowed the clones to connect with the consciousness of the main body, but only for a short time. The time duration was a result of the clone being much too weak to sustain such pressure for a long time. In Moon's case, the relay station also served a secondary function. It allowed her to utilize her main body's special abilities that were completely independent of her cultivation. Arriving in front of Lex's body, she sat on the ground on her knees and put on the equipment and prepared herself to connect to the relay station. This was not a quick procedure. Connecting to the station was the easy part, but then to wait for the station to locate and then connect to her main body was the difficult part. This was also extremely expensive and consumed resources the cultivators of Earth could not even dream of, but they never paid any mind to it. 0. Nearly 3 hours later, the connection finally stabilized and Moon gained some of her main body's powers. Not wasting any time, she immediately brought her hands over Lex's forehead and started to scan him. Considering she was checking Lex's soul, there was a great danger of her discovering the system. This was because, as yet, the system still only existed in the form of the magical treasure that had collided with Lex's body so long ago, and the magical treasure was taking refuge in Lex's soul. Fortunately, as a result of Moon only being a clone, her ability was greatly weakened and she did not discover the system. His soul is weird, Moon said, in an unsure voice. It's like it's been changed, but I can't tell how. It's stronger than it should be, so there's no chance of it accidentally disappearing. If one was observing Belle carefully, they would be able to tell her shoulders relaxed just a little. I can sense. I think, it's purified Wraith's blood. It strengthened Lex's soul, but since his soul was in an unstable state, the increase in strength only increased the instability. I think Lex knew there was something wrong with his soul, and then tried to strengthen it, but that's not fixing the problem at all. He may try to do that again unless the issue is fixed. Just use whatever strength you have left to stabilize his soul as much as you can. Whoever taught him how to fix his soul must be an amateur. If John knew that he had been called an amateur by a couple of kids, who knew how he would react? But fortunately for everyone, no one was around to see this. Liz, the only remaining sister, had at some point appeared in the room and watched in silence while eating ice cream out of a tub. A few minutes later, Moon collapsed as well. Belle carefully removed the helmet and carried Moon to her room, leaving Lex lying there on the ground. After a few minutes, when she did not return, Liz sighed in defeat and carried her brother and threw him onto a sofa. It was a good thing his body had improved due to his cultivation, or God knows what condition he would have been in after being handled so roughly. Liz walked to the kitchen where Belle was perusing through the fridge, eventually pulled out a cold slice of pizza and started eating it directly. If nothing else, the unusual fondness for cold pizza was something Lex shared with this sister of his. Do you really have to treat him like that? Like what? Going through the whole drama of acting like I'm in the dark is pointless. I just saved us a lot of time. And besides, I've thought it through. My story is solid, with no plot holes. The reason we know about cultivation is because of the council, and now that I have a job working for the council, our security will be assured. Furthermore, because our bodies are made up of spirit energy, if we try absorbing more, the cloning technique will destabilize and we will die. So now all we need to do is let him know that despite knowing about cultivation, we ourselves cannot cultivate. To recap, we know everything about cultivation so he does not need to keep secrets from us, we are safe so he does not need to worry about us, and we cannot cultivate so he does not need to care about resources for us. This will solve all of his problems and he can continue to live his life as he was previously. If he was able to travel from New York and get his hands on something like purified wraith's blood, he must have developed some decent connections. Maybe he's following one of the political prisoners Mom has sent to the planet. He can now focus on his own growth without worrying about us. Liz was silent for a few moments, and then eventually said, "You really don't want him to be around, huh?" Belle looked at her sister and understood what she was actually trying to say. He's my little brother, and I'm looking out for him the way I look out for you too. I do not hate him, if that is what you mean. My situation is not his fault, it is simply the result of something as simple as being born a girl instead of a boy. But it is better this way. I do not need someone to hand power to me on a platter, I can take it for myself. What you need is a boyfriend, Liz said under her breath as she rolled her eyes at her overly dramatic sister. It was such a burden being the only normal person in a family. No longer paying attention to Belle, Liz went and got some pink nail polish and pulled out a chair in front of Lex. As his beloved younger sister, she had to, of course, make his life miserable in the cutest way possible. When she lifted his hand, she noticed Lex's phone halfway outside his pocket. She picked it up, naturally, to snoop, only to find it dead. She shrugged and put it on charge, before turning back to her beloved brother. He would not wake up till his body adapted to his soul, so she had plenty of time to work. She recalled once, when they were children, Lex cut her hair while she was sleeping. The result was so bad that she had to get a bob cut. To this day, many years later, she had not forgiven him. Today, for the third time, she would get her revenge. The hours went by quickly, and the day passed calmly for the Williams family. This was mostly because Moon and Lex were passed out. Moon woke up early the next day, but Lex was still asleep. By now Mary had checked up on Lex, but only thought he was asleep on the couch, so she returned to her duties. The games were progressing with much excitement, and refugees had stopped coming in from Earth. In fact, many of them had even returned now, as things seemed to have calmed down. The fourth match finally started, this time in a rainforest. The beasts had taken the lead in points during the last match, so this time Alexander felt extremely motivated to regain his place in the front. At the same time, on Earth, a small diplomatic team was approaching Japan by boat. Most of the team were mortals, with only a single Foundation realm cultivator who had hidden his identity. Unbelievably, they had used a pigeon to deliver a message to the small nation to inform them of their arrival, since there was no other way to communicate at the moment. The members of the team looked onwards nervously, knowing full well what had happened with all the previous attempts at communication. But this time they came without any hostility, in hopes to simply negotiate, so hopefully things would end differently. When they arrived at the designated pier, they were surprised to see it completely devoid of other people. There was no movement, no noise, as if they were arriving at a ghost town. With no other option but to go on, the team disembarked and had only begun discussing how to proceed when they heard a voice. "Speak, what is it you came here to say?" Startled, the envoys turned to see a handsome Japanese youth, leaning against a nearby building. He was dressed in a gray hakama and stood so perfectly still that up until this moment, he had melded into the background. Even the cultivator had not noticed him, which raised his wariness. "We are diplomatic envoys from the council, here to meet with the Prime Minister and discuss relations between Japan and the rest of the world. We have been unable to communicate with anyone from the country. Japan's diplomatic stance is that gaijin are no longer welcome here. You may return with this message." The envoys looked at one another, then secretly turned to the cultivator. They did not know how to proceed. They did not want to antagonize the locals, but their own bosses weren't people who could be messed with either. Finally, the cultivator stepped forward and tried to talk to the youth. "Young man, we are here for an important matter. We cannot." Before the cultivator could continue his words, the youth took a single step forward. His movement was strange, and the diplomats were unable to clearly see what he had done, but the effect was only taking a step forward. Or so it seemed, until the cultivator's head fell clean off his neck. "I will not repeat myself again after this. You may return with this message." The envoys were so scared they practically tripped over themselves as they ran back to their boat, hoping this monster would not change his mind. They had not even seen what he had done to cut the cultivator's head off, but it was not something they wanted to know either. As he watched the gaijin leave, the man revealed his right hand that he had been hiding behind his body to reveal a katana. Slowly, as if he was savoring the action, he returned the weapon to its sheath. A voice spoke in his head: "Quest to kill an enemy with a higher cultivation of one major realm, completed. Host's authorization of the samurai system is being raised." The young man did not respond to the notification, and only watched the water. He was lost in his thoughts. Chapter 172. Something wrong. Waking up was a slow process for Lex, and it was taking a while for his grogginess to clear. Using immense willpower, he opened a single eye to look around. He did not immediately recognize the place, which filled his still half-asleep mind with confusion. But slowly, his memories returned and realized he was in his parents' house. His single eye shut again, and it was nearly 20 minutes later that he opened his eyes again, yawning as soon as he did. Despite just waking up, Lex felt incredibly tired, a sensation he hardly felt since he started cultivating. He lay there for a while longer, as the gears of his mind slowly started to turn and he started properly waking up. The first thing he noticed was the comforting beating of raindrops. He looked outside the window and saw rain. The room that he was in was dark, and slightly chilly, despite the blanket that covered him. Somewhere else, in the background, Lex could hear the muffled noise of a television. It was strangely peaceful. Lex wanted to continue laying there, so he did. His memories came back to him, and he remembered talking to his elder sister, Belle. She was the same, cold and emotionless yet somehow frustrated at the same time elder sister that he remembered. Somehow, that filled him with relief. "Mary, what's going on at the inn?" he asked in his mind, not bothering to get up. "The fourth match is going on, and should end in a few hours. A lot of guests from Earth have returned to their planet, but other than that, nothing majorly significant. On a level more relevant to you, your friend Larry has fully recovered. It was quite fortunate that he qualified as a refugee, otherwise he would not have been able to pay the inn to stay there. All his assets on Earth have been seized. He was able to pay for a few days using some artifacts that he happened to have when he arrived at the inn, but then he ran into Marlowe, who's paid for a long stay on Larry's behalf." Lex nodded, taking a mental note to meet up with Larry soon and find out what happened. For now, he finally got up from his sofa and stumbled in the dark to turn on the lights. The first thing he saw when the lights came on his outstretched hand, were pink nails. Lex froze in horror. He had experienced incidents like this before. He quickly ran to the bathroom to look in the mirror and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw there was nothing on his face. He forcefully scraped the polish off his nails, before exiting and yelling, "Is anyone home?" Upon receiving no reply, he walked towards the sound of the television, and found his youngest sister, Moon, watching a video with headphones on in the dark. "Hey," Lex casually greeted her as he flicked her headphones off. Hey, I'm watching something," she yelled, quickly pulling her headphones back, but then turned and looked at Lex. She paused her video and turned to look at her brother. For a moment they only looked at one another, before Moon finally said, "What's up with the gun? You been watching too many American rap videos?" Lex immediately face-bombed. "It's dangerous these days, it's for protection." "Yeah, must be tough, a lone boy living in the big city in America. Not at all like three girls living together in London, pretty safe here." Lex's lips twitched, but chose to divert the subject. "Where are mom and dad?" "Bangladesh." "Bangladesh? What are they doing in Bangladesh? Where even is Bangladesh?" As startled as he was, he should have expected his parents to be off in some other country. But how was he supposed to check up on them? Ask Will again for another transport? Where is Bangladesh, he asks. You've been to Bangladesh, idiot. How can you not remember? We talked to Mom and Dad yesterday, after you dozed off, so no need to go gunslinging off to South Asia, they're perfectly fine. Lex relaxed a little, and smiled at his sister. He didn't bother asking how they were able to contact their parents. Moon wouldn't lie to him, all that mattered was that they were fine. Speaking of which, what happened yesterday? I don't remember going to sleep. I dunno, you were on the couch when I got home. What about Liz and Belle? Are they home? Belle went out to work, Liz went out to do groceries. Speaking of which, follow me. Moon got up and quickly led Lex to the kitchen. She pulled a pot out of the fridge and put it on the stove and started to heat it. Liz made you soup and Belle left a few messages for you. She pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket and read off of it. My new job has a lot of security, so tell that idiot not to worry, and that he should quickly go back to New York because one of Mom and Dad's friends in Bangladesh has taught them way too much about arranged marriage and they've started looking at girls for Lex. At that point Moon burst into laughter and dropped the paper. Lex's lips twitched as he watched his sister laugh at him. He understood Belle well enough, though she never said things up front. She must have understood that Lex had to go through unusual means to come and check up on them and wanted to assure him they were all right. It was well enough, now that he knew they were all right he could return to the inn to take care of things there. To top it all off, he didn't really need to return to New York and could go to the inn directly from London. But since he was here, he might as well spend some time before he left. He pulled out a couple of bowls and laid a table, and caught up with Moon. He asked her about school and life here, and about any boys she might be interested in. When Moon only took the names of various celebrities, Lex secretly breathed a sigh of relief. If she was really interested in someone she would tell him. Despite their large gap in age, they were close to one another and Moon was incapable of keeping secrets from him, as far as he knew. If she really was interested in someone, he wanted to play the role of the cool brother who was okay with it, but secretly it stressed him out. They exchanged stories for a long time, and eventually the topic of cultivation came up once again. Moon explained how some people from Belle's new work came and told them about cultivation and tested them out. Apparently all of them shared a genetic defect that made them unable to cultivate. Lex had a few doubts, but he buried them deep in his heart. It wasn't as if he didn't have secrets of his own, and one day when he raised the level of the inn high enough where he could treat any kind of malady, he would bring his family to the inn. So until that day came, he would choose to believe his sister's words. The hours passed, and Mary let him know that the fourth game had ended. Liz finally came home, but Belle never showed up. The three siblings spent more time together, chatting and making fun of one another. Liz showed him the changes she had made to the heavy Harley. Last night she decided to paint his gun instead of his face, and so a purple butterfly was painted on the handle of his gun. Eventually, when it was getting late at night, Lex decided it was time for him to leave. Now that he had checked up on his family, he could focus on the inn without any worries. Not to mention, even if he did get worried, he could secretly check up on them since he was not planning on leaving London. After a long, drawn-out goodbye, Lex finally left. He told them he would check up on them from time to time, but both his sisters had already stopped paying attention to him as he crossed the door. Unsure of how to react to his siblings, Lex simply continued walking. After walking a short distance, his smile slowly turned into a frown. As a fledgling cultivator, his instincts had sharpened, and as much as he wanted to ignore it, he had a strong feeling something was wrong. He instinctively overlooked his family, as if there could be nothing suspicious about them, but could not figure out what it was. He was about to ask Mary what was happening at the inn when two men walked up in front of him and stopped. Lex's mind clicked, as if understanding that this is what his instincts were warning him about, and his hand hovered over the handle of his gun, ready to reach for it at a moment's notice. "Can I help you?" Lex asked, his tone slightly aggressive. Even an idiot would not expect friendly intentions from random strangers so late at night. "Hello, my name is Ben, I work for Interpol," one of the men said, and pulled out a badge for Lex to see. At a glance the badge looked real, but Lex had no way of knowing for sure. "We're conducting an investigation connected to terrorist organization and have reason to believe you have been in contact with some suspicious characters. Tell me, do you recognize this man?" Ben flashed Lex a picture of Larry on his phone, and despite trying to be cautious, Lex could not help being startled at seeing his friend's picture. "I suspected as much," Ben said upon seeing Lex's reaction. He then played a video of Lex walking out of Larry's apartment building and asked, "Is that you?" Instead of answering, Lex asked, "What is this about?" Larry Dershaw is a protected citizen, affiliated with various influential people and organizations. Shortly after your visit, Ben pointed at the video of Lex walking out of the building. "We believe there was an assassination attempt on Larry, after which he disappeared. We need to bring you in for questioning." 0. Lex suddenly did not know how to respond. It was indeed a fact that Larry had shown up at the inn, wounded and bloody shortly after his visit, but Lex had not had an opportunity to ask him yet what had happened. These agents seemed to be real, in which case he should cooperate, right? In the distance, a man was watching the interaction using a pair of binoculars. Tell the client we can only hold the target for a few hours, after which we'll have to let him go. If he wants to get his hands on the target, he'll have to do it himself, the man said on a phone call. Understood. In the meantime, find out what he knows about the Larry kid. A proper interrogation before we get our hands on him might be helpful. Chapter 173 Return to the inn. For a moment Lex hesitated, considering following the two officers. But the whole incident was weird. How did they find him? Why did they have a video of him leaving Larry's house? The video did not look like it was from a security footage, the video was shot from street level. This meant that they had agents present at the time. If that was the case, how could they have allowed Larry to be attacked? Most of all, he knew that Larry was struggling. If Larry had connections that could lead an investigation to follow him across the world, at a time where cross-continental communication was compromised, then he would not have a job at a club where he gets beat up for a living. His hesitation disappeared and he looked at the officer directly in the eyes, his hand practically touching his gun now. Should they make any sudden movements, he would be ready. I am sorry, but I am a U.S. citizen, I don't believe you can just randomly take me in for questioning. I am going to the embassy, if you have any concerns you can contact me there. Bringing up the embassy was a strong deterrent in Lex's mind, as according to some convention on international diplomatic relations embassies were immune to local law enforcement, or at least, something along those lines according to some TV show Lex had once seen. Moreover, embassies were usually very protective of their citizens. Not that Lex needed any protection. He had his gun, and if the worst came to worst, he would retreat to the inn. The reason he brought it up was because he wanted to see what reaction these agents would have. That would let him know if this was normal procedure or there was something more going on. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Ben said as his partner slowly moved to corner Lex from another side. You need to follow us for some questioning. I assure you, you will be let go in a few hours at most. Please cooperate, it is for your own good. To this, Lex did not reply. He kept his eyes trained on Ben, ignoring the other agent who was circling to get behind him. Though he remained silent, his stance as well as the aggression on his face let Ben know Lex had no intentions of cooperating. Since the situation had progressed as such, Ben reached out aggressively to grab Lex. But who was Lex? Even without his identity as the Innkeeper, he was someone who had fought his way out of hordes of zombies and survived being hunted by hundreds of wolves. He was not a person that could be casually messed with. Moving with a burst of speed, Lex grabbed Ben's arm and twisted it, so that Lex appeared behind Ben with his arm firmly pressed against his back. It was at this point that Lex realized that while these agents were cultivators, their strength was not much greater than him. Lex kicked Ben on the back of his knee, causing the man to buckle and fall onto the ground. This was just in time to see Ben's partner leaping towards Lex, trying to tackle him. Despite the strength of his plunge, Lex felt the man's move amateurish. Not even moving from his spot, Lex turned in one smooth motion and kicked up into the air. The lunging agent's face practically flew into Lex's kick on its own, and the man fell to the ground, unconscious. With both attackers defeated, Lex was momentarily stunned. He was so used to getting beaten up that he was expecting a difficult fight. The only reason he hadn't used his gun was that he knew the sound would have attracted a lot of attention in the silence of the night. But apparently, he did not even need it. I think you broke my arm, Ben said with a grimace, as he tried to pick himself up from the ground. But how could Lex allow him to so easily get up? Lex turned the man onto his back and stepped on his chest, to prevent him from getting up. I'm only going to be polite once. Tell me what you're really after, and no one will get hurt. I told you, I'm with Interpol, Lex did not bother wasting more time listening to him. He withdrew his gun, making sure to let Ben get a good look at it, then aimed it at Ben. I said, I'll only be polite once. Every time you waste your breath, I'll progressively ruder with you. So now, tell me, what do you want? Ben did not reply immediately, as he was frozen on the ground in fear. What he had experienced did not match Lex's report. He was supposed to be an inexperienced, new cultivator, not a battle-hardened fighter. Realizing that Ben was shocked, Lex waved his gun to attract his attention and said, I'm not known for being patient. Now, what do you want? Ben grit his teeth, but then promptly gave up. He wasn't an idiot to risk his life over an unofficial assignment. Okay, look, I'll tell you. But I really am from Interpol. I got an assignment to interrogate you about Larry, and hold you for a few hours before letting you go. That's all I know. Lex frowned, then kicked Ben on the head, knocking him unconscious. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then quickly left the area. He jogged for about 20 minutes, constantly checking to see if he was being followed, before he found a secluded corner and teleported back to the inn. A short while later, Ben finally woke up, groggy and in pain. First he checked up on his partner who, fortunately, was still alive. Then he made a call to report the situation. Whoever Larry was or why anyone was interested in was completely irrelevant to him. What he cared about was that Lex's cultivation and strength did not match his files at all. He was too strong. Something like that would always attract someone's attention. At the inn, Lex was sitting at his study table, wondering about what had just happened. Larry was a complicated guy, but now his troubles had involved him as well. Lex needed to find out what was actually happening, but a sweep of the inn told him that Larry was currently asleep in his room. He would wait till morning to talk to him, so until then Lex decided to focus on the inn. His additions were a huge hit, and guests lined the mountain and filled the forest and lake. But the problems that Lex did not even consider came just as quickly. More than one guest had slipped or tripped off the mountain. Though they were cultivators, had it not been for Lex's guards quickly catching them, they would have been seriously hurt. In the lake, unexpectedly, it was not a case of drowning that caused an issue, but a swimming human bumping into a swimming beast. Lex had to say beast because he had never seen any animal on Earth that could match this beast's appearance. It had a lot of limbs and a lot of heads connected to what looked like a ball of Play-Doh but was hard as steel. The bump seriously injured the human, but since it was an accident Lex could not blame either party. The forest had more predictable issues. Some people decided to camp out in the forest, but ran into some beasts who had a similar idea in the middle of the night. Suffice to say, the humans were greatly frightened. How was he even supposed to fix an issue like that? Truth be told, it was not something that could be fixed. But he could reduce the scary atmosphere in the forest. Lex released tens of thousands of fireflies into the first and told the galactic sovereign turtle to feed them something that would promote their cultivation just a bit. With the soft yet natural light they gave off, the forest should not be as scary in the darkness. The lake was also somewhat of an easy solution. He just expanded the lake and divided the areas into humans and beasts. This was not a permanent solution, but would work for now. The mountain was slightly tougher to deal with, so for now, he added various railings on the trails. But to deal with the situation properly, he told his AI staff to hike the mountain trails and take note of every climb that seemed dangerous to him. He would fix them one by one. But that was not all. While talking to Moon, he had a few ideas of how he could fill in the empty land in the inn meaningfully. One that he particularly liked and was currently planning was a lazy river. But, because of the freedom that the system allowed, he could take things even farther. In front of him he had a hologram of the inn opened, and he was slowly planning its path. Chapter 174 Breakfast Buffet. A lazy river is a water ride often found in water parks, recreation centers and other places that attract a lot of tourists and visitors. Usually, it would consist of a relatively shallow and narrow pool spread across a large area, with a gentle current flowing in one direction which would carry anyone floating in the water along with it. To Lex, this was an amazing idea because he could incorporate a few more features into it. Firstly, the lazy river provided Lex with another way to get around the inn, though not as urgently as Gerard's golf cart crew. Whoever would enter the river would be able to receive a small plastic raft in which they could lie and be carried along by the current. Another option would be to ride a gondola, a few of which Lex would have his AI's control in the river. But if Lex left it like that, it would be too ordinary. While Lex was testing out the river, and planning what he would do with it, an option that was as of yet grayed out suddenly became viable. For any guest riding along the river in the gondola, there was a chance for them to encounter a thick fog. Once they entered the fog, they would be transported and, for a short time, take a ride while viewing sights from a world they were not originally from. The gondola would be transported to another world, and should a resident of the world be lucky enough, they would be able to see the outline of a gondola going by in a spontaneously appearing veil of fog. Of course, guests would be prevented from leaving the gondola by the system, and residents of the world would be blocked from climbing the gondola. But Lex had been inspired. In the future, he planned to have a ship that would travel from world to world, and anyone lucky enough to climb abroad would be brought to the inn. For now, though, Lex was focused on the river and the gondola. After a short, picturesque trip to another world, the gondola would return to the river. There were a couple of issues Lex was having with the lazy river, though. First of all was the path. How large the river should be, and what parts of the inn it should circle were important to decide because Lex would have to give bridges over the parts that were divided by the river, not to mention build railings so anyone wouldn't accidentally fall in. He would be effectively cutting off those parts of the inn from being entered besides the built paths. The second issue was of lifeguards and the kind of staff he wanted. The lake, regardless of its size, was in one fixed position and could be viewed in its entirety from one place. The river, however, was long and narrow, and would require various staff members to keep an eye out for the sake of security for his guests. Hiring staff in itself was not the issue, Lex was earning enough on a daily basis to cover that. The issue was, for the river, as well as for the lake, he wanted to hire a different kind of staff. Mary, can I hire AIs that are not human? For example, can I use one of the species I've seen in Nibiru? Or a random one I can think of, like mermaids, for example. Yes, you can hire AIs that are a different species. But there are a few constraints. Unlike what you may imagine, the artificial intelligent beings that the Inn provides are actual, living breathing beings who have been provided with intelligence artificially, so that in addition to whatever biological inclinations they may have, they give priority to the Inn and the Innkeeper. So, for the system to create an AI of a different species, you must first submit some DNA of the species you wish to choose. There are certain things you may also want to take note of, that while these AI are birthed with the information relevant to serving the Inn, their personalities are formed naturally and cannot be controlled. So, in the scenario that you choose a species with a strong inclination for hunting, for example, you may want to use them in an environment where they do not mistake a guest for prey. Also, any species created by the system will always be at the mortal realm, even if the original species normally started out at a much higher cultivation realm. This information opened up a whole new array of options for Lex, but also limited him. Some time ago he remembered hearing one of his guests say something about mermaids, though he did not remember what, and thought they would make the perfect AI for his water-based attractions. He worked on the lazy river for a while longer, before deciding to take a break. He did not need to decide everything in one sitting. After a round of meditation, Lex did some exercise, showered, and then got dressed. Larry had woken up some time ago, and Lex was about to enter the inn for the first time using his original identity. After making sure everything was in order, Lex appeared in front of Midnight Manor as himself for the first time. He looked around, imagining what first-time guests must feel like. It occurred to him that, compared to the rest of the inn which had expanded rapidly, the manor was still relatively small. Shaking his head and not worrying about it for now, he asked Mary to guide him towards where Laurie was. After a short walk, Lex found himself behind the manor and in front of an array of lawn chairs and an outdoor breakfast buffet, where he identified Larry piling his plates with waffles. "Those must be good," Lex said, casually stepping beside him and grabbing a plate. "But I prefer pancakes." "Lex!" Larry exclaimed, nearly dropping his plate. "You old dog, I've finally understood why you never paid attention to any of the girls I pointed out," he said while laughing. "It's because you've been coming to this little slice of heaven." As much as Lex would have wished Larry was talking about the environment, his longing gaze towards one of the nearby AI staff let Lex know exactly what was on his mind. "Let alone here, even if I handed you a key to the underworld, you'd find some girls to gaze at." "Of course," Larry said, laughing even harder. "Don't you know what kind of girls would end up in the underworld? I'd go there every weekend if I could." Lex smiled as he looked at Larry. The man was ever in a good mood, or at least, the front he put up was phenomenal. Lex did not think he'd be able to even pretend to be this jolly if he had suffered such a serious assassination attempt. "Come, fill your plate and let's find a seat. I'm glad I ran into you here, I have something to talk to you about." "Is it about Sophia?" he asked in an excited whisper. "It's about her, isn't it? That old geezer Marlowe, he's having a honeymoon here with his wife and no one even knew." Lex listened to the little gossip as they filled their plates with an unflattering amount of food and then found a table to sit at. "I'd like to talk privately," Lex said to Mary, who then summoned a tinted glass dome around the duo. "Wow, how did you do that?" Larry asked, surprised. "If you ask your personal hologram, in case of small stuff like this, they can help you out." "No way. Hey little fella, what else can you do?" Larry asked, summoning his own personal holographic assistant. But before he got engrossed in an unrelated conversation, Lex said, "I gave you the key in case you even ran into trouble, so the fact that you're here should mean you ran into trouble, right?" Larry smiled skewed. He knew this conversation was coming, but he didn't want to involve his friend. His troubles were more serious than they seemed. Before he could think of how to answer, though, Lex continued. "Actually, I know for a fact that you ran into some trouble, because just last night I was intercepted by Interpol agents who wanted to take me into custody and question me about you." At this, Larry froze. He did not expect that Lex had already been involved. But, as unfortunate as it was, the timing of their last interaction automatically brought attention to Lex for anyone that may have been watching Larry. "After I questioned, shall we say, those agents, they revealed that someone had tasked them to hold me in interrogation long enough for them to arrive on scene. They were very interested in learning more about you, by hook or by crook." Finally, Larry sighed, and his smile withered off his face. "The situation is pretty bad. I guess I better explain." Chapter 175 Seized Assets. Do you remember Matilda? She was with us in our self-defense class at the start? Larry asked, as he cut into his waffles. Yeah, I remember. It all started with her, some time ago. You remember around the time some thugs came to your apartment and roughed things up? Around the same time, some people came to harass Matilda and me as well. But with Matilda, things went much, much farther. A lot of people ended up dead, and Bluebird got involved. Larry paused for a moment as he chewed his food. It seemed to Lex that he was considering his next words carefully. I don't know if you caught on since you visited my apartment, but I'm really good with computers. Like, really, really good. Let's say I fudged with the authority level on my Bluebird token, logged onto their network and found out everything that happened with her. I don't know if I got lucky, or if the agents at Bluebird just overlooked things, but I quickly found Matilda's trail. She was hiding out in a 24-hour gym and seemed badly hurt. I don't know why, but I couldn't just leave her like that. I deleted her trail and then went and found her. At this point, Larry let out a sigh. I must say, she is an extremely formidable woman. Did you know she's already in the chi training realm? In just a little more than a month. The body tempering realm is not necessarily one that takes too long, but, damn. Anyway, after I convinced her that I wasn't an enemy, I secretly brought her back to my apartment and helped her heal. We spent some time together after that. That's when I learned a secret that's pretty mind-blowing. You know the war that suddenly broke out? The one that overtook the world? I've spent a few days here at the inn, and learned a lot of things I didn't know before. You remember you once asked me, if the ICPAs keep normal cultivators in line, who keeps them in line? Well, apparently, Earth was being ruled by 5 families, the Morrisons being one of them. The ICPAs used to answer to them. To be more specific, they answered to the 5 family heads. But for a while now, they've secretly been planning to revolt against the family heads. They've been gathering allies, and getting rid of those who were too loyal to the family heads. Apparently, Matilda's older brother, the one who died and passed on his cultivation technique to her, was one of the people that had been silenced for his loyalty. Matilda felt like she was being hunted because her hunters were afraid that her brother had given her too much information, which indeed, he had. Larry paused for a moment, and he stared at his hands with desperate eyes. But even if she knew the truth, who could she tell? There was no way for her to get in contact with anyone that mattered, so all she focused on was getting stronger and getting revenge. I was incredibly moved by her story, and promised to help her hide her tracks. But as much as I wanted to help her, her story also got me thinking about what happened to my own family. About how we went from being one of the richest, most powerful families, to being nearly wiped out, framed, and then exiled. Could my family have also been one of the families that was silenced for being too loyal? I mean, if they had been planning this revolution for years, they had to have their agents in all the right places. How could they leave a family that ran one of the banks of the cultivation world out of their plans? And if, for whatever reason, my family chose not to cooperate, they could have wiped out anyone who knew the truth and banished the non-consequential ones. Once I got the idea in my head, I couldn't let go of it. I asked Matilda if she knew anything about this, but her brother never mentioned my family. That's when I started digging. That's when I started hacking into different companies' databases and looking for some answers. I thought I was hiding my trail well, but the day those guys came for me, I knew I must have messed up. They wanted me to follow them. They weren't really there to kill me, at least not yet. But I resisted, and a fight broke out. I got shot too many times. If I didn't have the key you gave me, I probably would have died. For a moment, Lex took in everything that Larry had told him. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, a part of him really wondered if the World War really happened because of him, because he'd held the Midnight Games and managed to get all the family heads to leave Earth. But if things really were the way Larry told him, they had been planning for this for a long time, and if they hadn't discovered a relatively easy way to handle the family heads, when the war ultimately broke out, it may have been much, much worse. Finally, Lex said, I remember you once telling me that you've met Alexander Morrison before when you were kids. Is that true? Of course, back then, my family was connected to all the big shots. Well, if you've been here a while, you probably know about the Midnight Games. Then you should also know about the fact that Alexander is also here, with his family. Maybe you could go to him and let him know about your suspicions. If your family really was killed for being loyal, then chances are, a lot of their other supporters were secretly silenced. Even if they don't want to help you, and even if they've lost a lot of influence on Earth, to protect themselves in the future, there's no way they won't investigate this. Or, even if they won't investigate, maybe they'll help you and Matilda out. What am I supposed to say? Hey Alexander, remember me? I'm a nobody right now, but when I was a kid our families used to work together. They have enough problems of their own to handle. They don't have time to help anyone else, not to mention I don't have anything worth them spending time on, anyway. Maybe that's true. But you're already being hunted, so asking for help can't make things worse. I can't stay here for too long. I have a few things I need to take care of, but I'll be back sometime tonight. I'll talk to you then, maybe we can figure something else out. Yeah, sure, replied Larry, and watched as Lex disappeared. After a few moments of frowning, his wide smile returned to his face, and he started gulping down his breakfast while enjoying the beautiful scenery known as women in uniform. Lex left the meeting abruptly, not only because he got the information he wanted, but because he got two very significant notifications from the system that required his attention. Quest complete, the World War has ended. Calculating host's performance. Reward upgraded for over 1,000 refugees. Reward rank, C. Reward, Detective's magnifying glass. Lex was pleasantly surprised that the World War had already ended, but at the same time relieved. He had no love for the Council or their shady business, but if the war was over, that hopefully meant the situation had stabilized and that all fighting had ended. He looked at his next notification. New notification, guest with level 1 prestige is unable to pay for services. Please cater to the guest urgently. Focus on the notification for further details on payment blockage. When Lex focused on the notification he was greatly amused, and despite the awkward situation of a guest being unable to pay, looked forward to their reaction when he told them. Quickly donning his host attire, Lex teleported directly in front of the meditation room where a now, only slightly abnormally large man was standing. Marlowe, the innkeeper said in a warm, pleasant voice, we meet again. I hope you have been well. Much better now, he said, wearing his signature mad grin. It took me years to build up all that muscle previously, but with the help of spirit food, I expect I'll be able to return to my former glory quickly. I wish you the very best on your journey. But I foresee a small obstacle on your journey, which is why I'm here to inform you of it. Oh? I'm all ears. It appears that your bank accounts have been frozen and your assets have been seized, which is why the Midnight Inn is unable to process your payment to use the meditation room. You've already paid in advance for your stay, as well as your son's treatment, so that should not be an issue, but if you wish to buy spirit food or use the meditation room, this may be an issue you want to address. Marlowe stood there frozen, his grin still stuck on his face, mostly because he was too shocked to even react. He couldn't pay? When was the last time he, Hanson Marlowe Bravi 4, was unable to pay for something? He honestly couldn't remember. Then, his eyes went red with fury. He was completely unable to hold in any longer, and he disappeared from the innkeeper's sight, promptly returning to Earth. Lex chuckled, secretly hoping it was people from the council who froze his accounts. Whoever it was, they were about to receive Marlowe's special care. Chapter 176 The Flower That Blooms in Spring. Larry let out a sigh filled with amazement as he finished his breakfast and slowly leaned back into his chair with a clear bulge evident under his shirt. It had been a long time since he'd eaten food that he didn't cook for himself, and to be able to eat so luxuriously was a splendor he had been divorced from for a long time. Fortunately, Marlowe had paid for his stay for the next few days, so he should be able to enjoy this for a while longer. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the gentle winds as it whispered in his ear. But along with the whistling wind, Larry was also listening to the conversations of the surrounding people. Lex had told him how to prevent their conversation from being overheard, but it appeared not many others knew about such features. Larry was learning a lot during his stay here, and it was important that he kept increasing his knowledge. The more information he had, the easier it would be for him to plan for things in the future because, contrary to what Lex thought, by going to Alexander for help, Larry's situation could get a lot worse. When he told Lex that he suspected his family was hunted for being loyal to the family heads, he was not lying. But at the same time, he was not telling the entire truth. There was a secret he kept close to his heart, and one that might have been the real reason for his family's demise. It was also the reason why, although he could not cultivate originally, he was able to cultivate now. Not to mention, it was also the reason why he could absorb spiritual metals. But the depth of his secret went a lot farther than that, and as much as he trusted and appreciated Lex, some secrets were better left unshared. His secret, along with this Midnight Inn, gave him the opportunity of a lifetime. If anyone paid attention to his right hand, they would notice that he was playing with a golden coin in between his fingers. As the coin danced in the palm of his hands, one might have been able to see the signature MI engraved on it, since it was the commemorative Midnight Games coin that Lex had made. It was supposed to be made from an extremely resilient metal, and could supposedly last the test of time, but the coin in Larry's hand already looked dull, as if it had suffered the wear and tear of a million years. If someone used their spiritual sense to observe him, they would notice every few hours, the smallest conceivable portion of the coin was absorbed by Larry into his body. They would also notice that each time he absorbed a bit of the coin, his cultivation would rise. At this rate, before the day was over, he would break into the chi training realm. "Excuse me, is it alright if I clear up the table?" a soft and gentle voice asked Larry, prompting him to open his eyes. It was one of the AI staff, a young woman with blonde hair and spectacular green eyes. "Haven't I told you before? How can I let you clean up after me? The most wonderful thing you can do for me is not to pick up my plates, but to allow me to accompany you." The waitress blushed and looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with Larry. "Little Z says that you are a bad man, and that I should stay away from you." "Oh?" Larry said with amusement in his voice. "And what does your heart say?" "My heart," she repeated for a moment, before getting lost in thought. Finally she said, "My heart says that the innkeeper is a lot more handsome than you." The waitress quickly picked up Larry's plates and rushed away, leaving the man there wondering whether he should laugh or cry. When Marlowe left, Lex also returned to his room. Now that he had some time, he thought about his future. Someone was hunting him on Earth, but that didn't matter to him because he could simply choose not to return to the Earth. He knew his family would be safe, with Belle having a job with the council, so he could focus entirely on his own tasks. The inn had gotten a lot of exposure, so he no longer needed to return to the days of desperately looking for guests to scrounge up some MP. What he needed to do now was develop it. He also needed to raise his own cultivation. He had decided to blatantly use whatever loopholes he could discover, so he started planning for that as well. He asked the galactic sovereign turtle what plants could aid in the cultivation of a chi training cultivator, but the turtle did not have such specific knowledge. In the end, he asked the turtle to plant whatever plants it could think of that aided in cultivation. But then the issue of seeds came up. Lex could only buy them if the system gave the option, but if it didn't he would have to manually search for them. To cater to this problem, the turtle returned to Nibiru for a while to search for some plants it knew that could provide aid. The next thing Lex needed to do was expand more and build more rooms, something he was putting off until the games ended. He did not like the feeling of all his rooms being booked. This was an indicator that, despite such a cheat, he could not keep up with demand. But he would have a better idea for how many rooms he required when the extra rush because of the games disappeared. He had already thought of various ways to add more rooms, on the ground, underground, underwater and even in the air. All options were available to him. Yet another issue was, though he did not need to, he felt bad having his AI work without pay. But at the same time, he could not afford to pay them a lot as he needed to keep expanding, which required a massive consumption of MP. He needed to spend some time on the math to analyze his latest earning trend, and create some projection charts for anticipated income growth and expenses to ultimately decide how much he could afford as fixed expenses in terms of salaries. This was absolutely not some technical vocabulary usage just to avoid thinking of paying his employees, not at all. Lex groaned. He had too much work to do, and he felt like doing none of it. Suddenly, he felt like taking care of his guests. In the beginning, he used to take care of his guests personally, but lately his staff had been handling everything and he rarely got to engage with any of his guests. He missed the feeling of being a host, and watching his guests' amazement firsthand. Suddenly, he decided to put his work away and search for some guests to cater to. He scanned the inn a few times, trying to see if anyone was doing something interesting. That's when he happened to see a guest that he hadn't seen in a long time, and smiled. He really should welcome his old guests personally. In front of the Midnight Manor, Blaine looked at the changed scenery, holding his girlfriend's hand. The first time he'd come here, he had been dragged in by a zombie along with his brother-in-arms, Chen. The both of them had their wounds treated by the innkeeper, and had somehow survived. He'd had a long journey after that, and ultimately split with Chen to go search for his girlfriend, Iris, who had been taken off-planet. It had taken some time, but he finally tracked her down and, after contacting her and letting her know he was alive, had to go through a very long process to be transported onto the same spaceship as her. Today, after so many days, they had finally reunited. Since he first came to the inn, he had been wanting to bring Iris here, and finally he had the opportunity. But while some things remained the same, the world of the inn had also changed tremendously. "The air smells so nice here," said Iris, bewildered. One might have expected that the girlfriend Blaine was so in love with was a world shakingly beautiful, but on Vegas Minima there were no fair maidens, only warriors. The woman who stood beside Blaine was extremely muscular, and was garbed in battle gear, despite their change in environment. He had an eye patch, to help with healing while her body got accustomed to a new implant. Before the implant, she wore the eye patch to protect her dead eye. A few lines marked her forehead, and her age showed around her eyes, but none of that mattered to Blaine. To him, she was the flower that bloomed in spring, and the honey that tasted sweeter than most resplendent spiritual fruit. He had brought her here because to him, after her embrace, this was the place that brought him the most happiness, and he wanted to share it with her. "Welcome guest," said the innkeeper with a fond and warm voice, as he stepped out a shining light. "It has been a while since I saw you last, I hope you have been well." Chapter 177 Penetration. "I hope you understand, Mr. Marlowe," the man said as he pulled on his collar with one finger, loosening it. "I am only here on behalf of my client. None of these things are my doing, I'm just delivering a message." Despite the smile on the man's face, his nervousness could be seen by the amount he was sweating. "Please, enlighten me as to what your client wants to convey," Marlowe said, as he leaned back in his chair. He was not sitting in the luxurious furniture he had picked out for himself in his apartment. No, he was currently sitting in the seat of the regional director for Bluebird in the main Bluebird office. The lawyer did not know how, or why, the man could so casually sit upon such an important seat, and why no one else in the building seemed to be saying anything to the man, but it was too late to change the plan. "It's like this, Mr. Marlowe. You have built up a lot of prestige for yourself over the years, but at the same time, everyone also knows that you are gravely injured. You could probably put up a good fight against other Golden Core experts, but that fight would be your last. And with your recent disappearance, everyone is suspecting that your old wounds have made your situation worse. I mean, your students were harassed so much, one of them even quit your class and yet you did nothing. Your reputation has taken a hit." The more the lawyer spoke, the wider Marlowe's grin grew, but for some reason, it only made the lawyer more nervous. "Having said that, my client deeply respects you and does not want to cause you any trouble. We only need Larry Dershaw's whereabouts. So long as you tell us where he is, your bank accounts will be restored and all your businesses will once again run normally." Instead of replying, Marlowe started laughing. But the harder he laughed, the louder his voice became, the more pressure the lawyer felt. He was only at the beginning of the Foundation realm, so even Marlowe's regular aura would easily suppress him, let alone his rising aura now. The more Marlowe laughed, the angrier he got. Until, suddenly, something in his body clicked. His new form of cultivation, that had been suppressed on the verge of completion for so long, was finally complete. He was no longer a cultivator. He now walked the path of a prime. With his breakthrough complete, Marlowe's aura exploded outwards with a strength Earth had rarely witnessed. Had any of the 5 family heads, previously the strongest humans on the planet, been here, even they would have been suppressed. The lawyer fell out of his chair as he looked at the madman, roaring with laughter. "Midnight Manor, the Midnight Inn. Innkeeper." Blaine exclaimed in excitement, "It has definitely been a while. But I'm great. I finally got to reunite with my girlfriend, Iris." Blaine looked towards the girls whose hand he had firmly gripped, and the wide grin on his face could not be more pure. The last time Lex had seen Blaine, and even to this day when he saw Chen, the duo was usually very submissive in front of Lex. After all, they had met Phallic, and seen how even he was respectful to the innkeeper. But now, Blaine was radiating endless joy and excitement, nothing else. Lex observed the heroic woman that caused Blaine's heart to swoon and read her status. Name, Iris. Age, 24. Sex, female. Cultivation details, Chi training 4th level. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition, has suffered grave injuries and can no longer cultivate or undergo severe exertion. Her lungs have been severely injured, and can only be treated to reduce pain, but cannot fully be healed. Multiple small wounds across her body were detected. Patient suffers from greatly depleted vitality. Remarks, she has lived the life of a warrior, but managed to escape the death of one. Definitely deserves a soft onesie. Lex did not let it show on his face, but her condition let him know just how difficult a life she had lived. It made sense, since living on Vegas Minima was all but hell until recently. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Lex said to Iris, his voice filled with sincerity. No, the pleasure is mine," Iris said, as she bowed towards Lex. "Blaine told me how you saved his and Chen's life. I had almost given up on everything when I thought he was dead. I can't tell you how relieved I was when he contacted me. Please, accept my thanks." Though she managed to keep her tears from falling, how could Lex not notice her watery eyes? "It is my duty, and my privilege. Please, stand up straight. Would you like me to show you around? Chen and Lily are also at the inn, so if you like, I could take you to them as well." "We'll get around to meeting Brother Chen," Blaine said, "but first I thought I'd show Iris around. The place has changed so much, it seems like I'll have to explore it again as well." "Then please, by all means, enjoy yourselves. If you need anything, your personal holographic assistant is always available." Lex let the happy couple explore on their own, as it was perfectly clear that Blaine wanted to spend some time alone with her. But, right before they left, Lex sent him a mental message knowing that Iris, though not completely healable, would benefit greatly from visiting the recovery room. He took this time to interact with a few more of his guests, until the 5th midnight game began. This time, the terrain seemed difficult to determine. Everyone appeared in tunnels, some wide and some small, and were split into various groups. Before any of them could begin to explore, however, the surprise challenge for this round was announced immediately. All the contestants could use whatever points they had accumulated so far to increase their strength. The more points they spent, the greater the increase. But at the same time, the increase was also temporary, so it had to be timed perfectly. This was a huge risk. By utilizing their points, they could gain a lead on the other world in destroying the node, but if too many participants used too many points, the gain in points from destroying a node would be outweighed by the points lost. To top it all off, since the contestants were so split up, they could not plan properly either. The crowds watching the match went crazy, and the anticipation was at an all-time high. Blaine and Iris had gotten seats in the Coliseum, and for the first time enjoyed a cheering crowd. But Lex was distracted by a notification he received. Apparently, one of the skills he'd entered into the mystery trial that he was looking for had been found. The skill he had discovered was assassination, and the person who had it happened to already work for him, John. This was interesting. The man seemed so amicable. Lex would have guessed he was an assassin. But that was likely what made him good at it. Lex decided to observe him for a while, and then decide how he was going to ask him for what Lex had planned. And no, Lex was not planning on carrying out assassinations. In the IT field on Earth, there was a certain job called penetration testing. It was when someone checked a software, a business, a building, anything really, for vulnerabilities. For example, if security was weak at a data center, regardless of how secure the firewalls were, they could not prevent them from being physically accessed. If a software had obvious flaws, it could easily be hacked. If a business was not taking precautions, it could be taken advantage of. Following this line of thought, Lex thought of offering a form of penetration testing as a service, up to a certain level, of course. The client would hire a tester, who would then try to infiltrate or assassinate the client, then provide a detailed report on whatever weaknesses or flaws they encountered. Considering how dangerous the universe probably was, Lex thought it was a good idea. Now all he needed to do was get a good idea of how skilled John really was, and what his cultivation level was. To be honest, he had some doubts about John. Apparently, he had been to the mystery trial numerous times, but had not solved it yet. Was he really any good? Then again, to be fair, so far no one had completed the mystery trial. In his room above the battle axe, John sat on a sofa as he considered his gains for the day. Today, finally, for the first time, he had made some progress towards solving the mystery trial. So far, each and every assassination he had attempted had been planned and provided guidance from by his own assassination system. Each time, however, he failed. Out of frustration, this time John did not wait for his system to guide him and used his own instincts to attack, and finally made some progress. Though he still failed, he figured something out. If he wanted to pass the trial, he could not rely on his system. But instead of relief and finding a breakthrough, John was filled with fear. How could the trial differentiate between when he used the system and when he didn't? And if the trial could do so, did that mean the Innkeeper had also seen through his system? Chapter 178 Space Pirates. Far out in the vast universe, a small spaceship was flying through the expanse. The crew consisted of only 4 men, since the ship itself was too small to accommodate more. Though not exactly routine, their mission was not exactly unheard of either. Aboard a ship designed to be covert and quick, they were personally tasked by Ragnar to deliver a batch of goods to the nearest Jotun operational planet. Their cargo included various rare metals, some extremely rare demonic resources, a few plants, and some documents. What they were unaware of was a small box full of hundreds of golden keys that had been secretly placed alongside the cargo. This was one of a dozen such ships that had been sent out, but what made this one unique was that 3 of the crew members were dead and the remaining member seemed to be casually eating a meal and waiting for something. Soon, the ship was intercepted by a much larger vessel. As much as the crew member would have liked to stop the ship himself, he could not control the ship, so rougher means were required. Once the ship's engines were disabled, the Jotun ship was pulled into the cargo hold of the larger ship which, upon closer inspection, bore the insignia or some random space pirates. "You wasted a cover you've held for 7 years," said one of the pirates that welcomed the remaining crew member. "I hope it was worth it." "Oh ho, you have no idea. There's a whole batch of high-level demonic resources. We're going to be rich." The pirate was startled at the news, but suddenly started laughing with excitement. Indeed, they were about to get rich. Lex secretly watched John for a while, but the man did nothing except pace around his room. This would not get him any results. Lex had to think of a different way to determine John's abilities. He could think of only 2 ways: either he sent John on a trial, the way he had sent Marlowe, and analyze his skills that way, or he set a condition for John to pass the mystery trial. They both came with their own problems, however. Lex had no way of knowing John's cultivation level, and so any trial he could come up with might not be accurate. The mystery trial itself had never been finished, and it was unknown what the difficulty level for that was. After considering his options for a while, Lex still decided to stick to the mystery trial. Its difficulty was a form of quality control, and Lex was in no particular rush. Furthermore, there was another very important issue with giving John a trial. The only information Lex had received from John's status was that his cultivation was sealed, and finding a way to fix that issue would also be an important factor in having him do his second job, so more time was a good thing. He appeared in Battle Axe's lobby, and asked Doe, John's AI assistant, to let John know that the innkeeper wished to speak to him. Doe dutifully hurried to inform John, whose expression stilled when he heard the news. Instead of letting panic take over, John settled his emotions and receded into a state of suppressing his emotions. His previous occupation put him in a lot of difficult situations, and he would not be able to survive if he lost control so easily. Furthermore, even if the innkeeper knew something about the system, there was no guarantee that he would even be interested in it. John entered the lobby with a smile and welcomed the innkeeper inside, as he observed the innkeeper. He was as warm and genial as ever, and John was unable to garner any other information about him at all. Even his finely honed instincts only told him that in front of him was a regular human with no cultivation, which was impossible. How have you been doing, John? It seems you've adjusted well to the inn. As ever, John was dressed like a biker from Earth. His leather jacket and jeans combination had made him easily identifiable to the many guests, and he always wore his aviator glasses, even indoors. Of course, everyone knew those glasses could hide one's appearance and identity. Many guests wore them, but no one commented on them. I have been doing very well, innkeeper. The work is rewarding, the environment is safe and relaxing, and there is always something interesting happening to keep me entertained. I have earned quite a bit of MP betting on a particular beast during the games, and I'm very hopeful about its performance. Oh, which one? Lex asked, curious about who his employee supported. John waved to pull up a screen that automatically focused on one of the participants. But at viewing the scene, Lex quietly looked away and John went pale. The beast he had bet on was dead. He was broke again. Lex coughed, waking John from his misery, allowing him to dismiss the window. I also get to meet a lot of interesting people, he said, smiling weakly. Yes, it's a diverse crowd here at the inn. I'm glad to know you're getting along fine. But I wonder, have you thought about your future? My future? Yes, I mean. Do you want to stay here at the inn, working at the Battle Axe? Are there other things you are interested in? Or perhaps, do you want to leave the inn one day? Something along those lines. John was silent for a moment, before saying, since you've brought this up, do you have something in mind? At this point, he was all but sure that this matter had to do with his system, but he would never admit it unless the cards were laid on the table. Indeed, I do, actually. I have an opportunity for you, if you can grasp it. I was looking for someone with the skills of an assassin and thought you would be a good fit. Innkeeper, there must be some mistake. I am no assassin. The innkeeper gave John a knowing smile before saying, haha no John, I never said I was looking for an assassin, nor am I interested in having anyone assassinated. I said I was interested in someone with the skills of an assassin for a job. No need for any concern. I don't mean to harm anyone, quite the opposite, in fact. But I won't speak more on it for now. If you are interested in grasping the opportunity, there are still things you need to do to qualify. But I won't make it too difficult for you. How about you successfully complete the mystery trial and unseal your cultivation? Once you've done that, you can come find me for the other job. Without giving John any time to respond, Lex left. By letting John take care of his own sealed cultivation, he was reducing a burden on Lex's shoulders and elevating Lex's image in John's mind. And if he took too long to do either of those conditions, Lex could just look for another candidate. Then John would have no one else to blame but himself. With that taken care of, Lex considered watching the ongoing game. He really hadn't been following the games too closely and was surprised to find that the beasts had taken the lead in points. But, just as he was deciding on what to do, he felt something strange happen to his body. It was the feeling of relief one got when they cracked their bones after sitting still all day, but, the feeling wasn't coming from his bones. It was coming from something deeper. Lex teleported to his apartment and then pulled up his status to see if anything changed, especially with his tumor, but what he saw surprised him greatly. Name, Lex Williams. Age, 23. Sex, male. Cultivation level, Regal Embrace Body Tempering Stage 3 complete. He was too stunned to view the rest of his status as his gaze was fixed on his cultivation. The third stage was already complete? Hey Mary, I think my third stage is complete, in equal parts confusion and excitement. In that case, I suggest you either complete the fourth stage right now, or after the event ends, as this process should take 2 to 3 days. Lex hesitated for a moment, but his excitement got the better of him. He had 6 days before the event ended, so he could make it in time for the closing ceremony, even if the procedure took a little longer. In that case, Mary, take care of things while I'm away. Not waiting any longer, Lex immediately began the 4th process. Once again, teleported to the familiar white room, Lex lay down comfortably on the bed and fell asleep. This time, his body was no longer injected with anything, and it appeared as if he was just sleeping. But if anyone else were to enter that room, if their cultivation was not strong enough, they would explode under enormous pressure. Slowly, his body, spirit and soul were being melded into one completely new entity, never before seen in this universe. At the same time, in his inn, a group of drunk space pirates stumbled through a bright light, completely unaware of what happened. Chapter 179 King. Mary's projection floated over Lex's sleeping body, utterly confused. His soul had stabilized way too quickly, right? But, whatever. There was a saying on Earth that went like, "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth." She had no idea who would gift someone a horse, but the idea was all that mattered. Before she could ponder more about the metaphors and phrases from Earth, she was notified about an issue. A bunch of new guests had shown up, and had started a fight. The problem was, they were fighting amongst one another, so the guards weren't sure if they needed to stop them, and so they contacted her. Mary disappeared to take care of the issue, only to find most of them were already asleep or unconscious on her arrival. A few were fighting amongst themselves, but shortly after pulling them apart, they too fell asleep. Now Mary really was lost. They had never taken care of drunk guests before. But perhaps it would be too much to punish them just for this, so she had the guards carry them somewhere secluded where they could nap out in the field. She would deal with them when they woke up. Just like that, Mary was putting out fires all over the inn while the innkeeper slept like a baby. The hours passed and the final game for the Foundation experts finally ended. Of the 1,000 soldiers that had followed Alexander, only 600 were in fighting condition by the end. Almost 200 of them died while the rest were gravely wounded. The casualties for the rest were drastic as well, though the Jotuns only had casualties because of Promod's surprise attack. Surprising everyone, the beasts had taken the lead in points during the last 2 matches, and Earth had fallen far behind both. This was because, split up as they were, many soldiers ended up using their points for extra strength whenever they were in precarious situations. The next day, the 6th match, and the first of the Golden Core experts, would begin. The zombies, the Jotuns and the beasts had armies ready and waiting, but the Earthlings only managed 800 Golden Core experts of their 5,000 quota. This was because, to begin with, Golden Core cultivators were rare on Earth, and the ones that managed to reach that realm often were not fighters. Of those 800, only 10 were Brandon Morrison's followers. The Morrison family had decided not to participate heavily in this section of the games, as they no longer had much to gain. The only reason these 10 were even going was because they wanted to follow Brandon. As for the reason Brandon wanted to go, he claimed he needed the exertion to help him break through the nascent realm. "You performed well," Brandon said to his son, who was busy recovering from his latest wounds, "but you took on too many wounds. Your combat style is immature. Compare yourself to the Jotun soldiers, who suffered almost no casualties and few wounds under normal circumstances. Think on how you can improve, and if you need inspiration, watch my match tomorrow." Brandon was always extremely serious, a large contrast to his own father, but he was also extremely remarkable. Despite the fact that Ragnar was the nascent realm cultivator of their family, Brandon was the one that had built up their strength and raised their armies. Alexander had never seen his father fight properly, so he was looking forward to it. In a different part of the inn, Blaine had taken Iris to the recovery room to heal. Behind him stood Chen and Lily. Blaine was completely broke, since he had spent his time looking for Iris and had not worked at all in that time, so he had to ask Chen for a loan to heal Iris. Yet again, in another part of the inn, Little Blue was searching for its father, the galactic sovereign turtle. But the turtle had gone back to its planet temporarily, and so the whale was unable to find him, which caused it a lot of distress. Unaware of what else to do, the whale went towards Main Street to find Z. Unknowingly, somehow this reclusive and anime-obsessed AI had become the support system for many of the inn's permanent residents. As night fell and the pirates finally woke up, Mary quickly appeared and had the guards reproach them heavily. Confused, scared, but mostly hungover, the pirates got a vague understanding of things before promptly returning to wherever they came from. In a different place, Larry was waiting for Lex, who had said he would return at night. But as the hours passed and Lex never showed up, Larry began to worry. His thoughts, however, were hidden well behind his smile and constant flirting. The night passed, and the next day the first match for the Golden Core experts began. Some people found it strange that the innkeeper didn't make an appearance, but things continued as usual. Harriet Shelby Ruby Selma Jane, the zombie leader whose name only Lex knew, did not behave as pragmatically as Pramod when the first match started. Since the zombies and the Jotun Empire spawned in the same place, she instantly ordered a fight to the death. Unlike the fight with Foundation Realm experts, which somewhat resembled a fight between mortal armies in terms of formation and weapons, a fight between Golden Core experts was vastly different. The spiritual techniques were of another realm, and the repercussions of the fight could be felt across the current map. Speaking of which, the environment was actually underwater. They were literally fighting against not only each other, but the ocean currents as well. Brandon made a beeline for the ongoing fight while the beasts headed towards the node. Compared to their somewhat mediocre performance in the previous rounds, this time, the beasts were a lot more aggressive. A lot of viewers had their eyes on Brandon, despite so many other options, as a lot of bets had been placed on him. As the father of such a well-performing candidate, Alexander, the crowd expected nothing less from him. And, true to the Morrison name, Brandon was extremely lethal on the field. If Alexander's performance could be described as explosive, then Brandon was steady. In less than an hour, he killed over a dozen Golden Core zombies, and was involved in a direct clash against Harriet. To be more exact, he was fighting the third body Harriet inhabited. Every time he killed the zombie, even crushing the zombie core to dust once, Harriet would somehow take over another zombie. Were Lex watching this match, he would recall that Harriet suffered from a condition the system described as a failed artificial animation, and would wonder if this had anything to do with how she kept coming back. If she had been smart, Brandon would have had no way of knowing that she had taken over another zombie, but each time she would start cursing and screaming at him, even going so far as saying she was immortal and that she would not rest until she took over Brandon's body in revenge. If the situation bothered him, no one could tell, as Brandon's expression did not change even a little throughout the game. Even when the game ended in only 4 hours because the beasts had somehow decimated the zombie army defending the node, Brandon was unperturbed. Like that, Brandon became a fan favorite, even more than Alexander, and quite a few ladies tried to court him. It was unfortunate for them that he treated them with the same indifference as the zombies that he killed. The very same indifference he kept when Harriet herself courted him between matches. Like that, 2 more days passed by, and nothing too out of the ordinary happened. The beasts had an irrecoverable lead now, as they continued to destroy the nodes on their own in the following 2 matches. At this point, even the Jotun army had changed their strategy from trying to destroy the node to keeping the pressure off the beasts. All they cared about was reclaiming the planet, so if they did not win the final prize, it was alright. It had to be noted that only 200 of the Golden Core cultivators from Earth were still participating. The casualties they had suffered in the first match had been extremely heavy, and most of the survivors refused to participate anymore. The only ones still fighting were like Brandon, wanting to ready themselves for a potential breakthrough in the future. With access to the Midnight Inn, the Golden Core realm was not the end of the path for them, and their buried ambitions had been rekindled. It was on the morning of the 9th midnight game, and the second last match, that something unusual happened, at least for those who came from Earth. New York had been declared an independent country as well as a monarchy, under the rule of its first king, Hanson Marlowe Bravi IV, as recognized by the Council of New Order. No one saw this coming, and everyone was extremely confused by what had happened. Though Marlowe had a reputation, it was not as if everyone on Earth knew him, so many were wondering who this random upstart was that had somehow obtained recognition from the Council. Only a very few people knew that it wasn't Marlowe receiving their recognition, but him sparing their lives for provoking him in the first place. Based on his personality, he could not be threatened the same way the other family heads were, and they had not planned for a sudden new powerhouse either. In fact, he was not even too interested in taking over New York, but the council had already offered it to him to placate him, and he did quite like the sound of king. What they didn't know was that it was not Marlowe's lack of ambition that saved them. He was too worried about his son's condition to care about measly titles. In fact, if someone from the council hadn't specifically provoked him, he would never have even bothered with them at all. As for what happened after his son recovered, that remained to be seen. Chapter 180 Body Tempering Stage 4. Although Marlowe had declared himself king, and New York had gone from being a state to an independent country, practically there were no changes in the way things operated. No laws were changed, no new government bodies were created, and no one got any special privileges. Still, for the people of Earth, such a change overnight was too drastic to accept. Riots and protests erupted the very next day and filled the streets of Manhattan. Instead of dispersing them, though, the police only maintained the peace. At the end of the day, the governor of New York made an announcement that, in summary, stated whether the people accepted or rejected the truth made no difference. The whole world was changing, let alone New York, and they could accept the changes or test their luck. Perhaps once he had dealt with his private matters, Marlowe would turn his attention back to New York or even all of Earth, but neither the council nor the politicians in New York had any way of knowing what would happen. Of course, the council was not going to leave this threat hanging over their head, and while Marlowe returned to the inn, they already began taking precautions. How effective the precautions would be could not yet be determined. The council considered him a normal nascent cultivator, and did not have a concept of what it meant to be a prime. Who could blame them? Few in the entire universe did. Sometime later that day, Lex finally woke up. Unlike his previous procedures, it was not a gradual process. One moment he was asleep, the next he was completely and fully awake. Even without moving, or opening his eyes, Lex felt a tremendous difference. It was not just his strength that had increased, but the fluidity with which his thoughts flowed was unprecedented. It was like he had been wearing shackles that were keeping him in place, but had finally broken free of them. Still lying in bed, without opening his eyes, Lex called up his status. Name, Lex Williams. Age, 23. Sex, male. Cultivation level, regal embrace body tempering stage for complete. Health, optimal. Midnight points, 9,730,745. Midnight in level, 3. Remarks, even hibernating bears aren't as irresponsible as you. Go take care of your guests. A relieved smile crept onto Lex's face. As he had learned, oh so long ago, by completing all 4 stages of the regal embrace, his tumor had been removed. He was in perfect physical and mental condition, and for the first time in a long time, Lex felt like himself again. He felt like that guy who had made video games in his spare time, like the guy who had negotiated a $7 million deal, like the guy who had graduated with honors by pulling off nothing but last-minute all-nighters. Mary, he called out, as he slowly sat up. He was slow, not because he needed to relearn how to control his strength. No, despite the massive increase in strength, he felt like he could control himself even better now. He got up slowly, because he was preoccupied with thoughts of how his journey had begun. He thought back to that night when he felt so restless in his home that he went to a park in the middle of the night. He thought of the shooting star he saw. He thought of the wish he made. He thought of the first time he heard Mary's voice, and thought himself crazy. You're finally done. Mary appeared in front of him with a smile. She was suited up, similar to Lex, and her red hair was tied up into a neat bun. Lex remembered when they had met, she had taken on the appearance of Mary Jane, and was named after her too, but now somehow he felt like she had subtly changed. Yeah, I am. Finally. He smiled warmly at her, but didn't move, and didn't say anything else. After a couple of moments, Mary looked at him with a confused look. Is anything the matter? No, nothing's the matter. I was just thinking back on everything I've done with the inn so far. I've been to different worlds. I've fought zombies and I've fought wolves. I've had guests from different species and different galaxies, maybe even realms. I hired some AI, got a barber, made a small lake then a big one. I hired a gardener and then hired a turtle to garden. Everything was so random. I guess having a tumor made it hard for me to focus on one thing for too long. He flashed Mary a smile, who responded with a weak smile of her own. Lex's words and tone did not seem to match. The words sounded like he should be happy, but his tone sounded scrutinizing. But I guess life's random sometimes, huh? As random as a system falling out of the sky. A system that can transport people from across the universe, but somehow lagged and fell into me while scanning Earth. At this point, Mary definitely understood that Lex was suspicious, and not just about the system, or else he would not have been giving her such a strange look. Yes, I suppose that's how it is. Life's as random as an augmented reality avatar provided by the Midnight Inn for my acclamation. Those were your exact words, right? God, you talked a lot like a robot back then, though that changed pretty quickly. Mary let out a defeated sigh and said, You can just ask what you want to ask, there's no need to be so sassy. I can't lie to you, anyway. Lex chuckled, his previous critical demeanor gone, and he was back to his usual self. I'm sorry. I just felt a little dramatic. But even if I ask, I'm pretty sure I already know the answers. Something about my authority not being enough. But, let's try anyway. Who knows, maybe I have enough authority for a hint. Now, Lex was just being cheeky and Mary looked at him with annoyance in her eyes. Let's get reacquainted, shall we? Where did the system come from? As of right now, your authority is insufficient to know the origin of the system. Alright, guessed as much. Next question, are there other systems out there? Mary let out a defeated smile. It seemed the disappearance of the tumor had affected Lex greatly, and some things that were hidden in plain sight could no longer fool Lex. As of right now, your authority is insufficient to know such a question. Why did I get the system? It was coincidental. The system lagged, and you happened to be in its path. Yes, a system that can literally create AIs out of nothing lagged while flying over my head. I thought you said you couldn't lie. I cannot, this is the answer provided to me by the system. Lex rubbed his chin as he observed Mary, trying to decide whether he believed her or not. Truthfully, he trusted her. But there was a lot of ambiguity about the system that just made him feel unsettled. Alright, moving on. The system talks to me using remarks. Does that mean the system is alive? As of right now, your authority is insufficient to know such details about the system. Predictable. But it remains a fact that the system can talk to me, since it does so in the form of remarks. But you, Mary, are not the system itself, correct? Yes, I am an assistant provided by the system to help the host. See now, I find it strange that the system gave me such a good helper. I can't seem to understand the purpose of the system. From the beginning, when I opened the starter pack, the system has made a point not to help me out and let me do things on my own. It did not help with my cultivation, it did not help with information about the universe, it did not give me the option to keep out hostile guests. It was complete, dumb luck that I ended up getting the regal embrace. It even went as far as threatening death in its first few quests, when I was at my most vulnerable and most likely to fail. With everything about the system designed to make me do stuff on my own, and give me a tough time while doing it, why would it give me such a helpful assistant? It feels contradictory. If you are asking the purpose of the system, it is to host the greatest and grandest in the universe, without any comparison. And why is that? As of right now, your authority is insufficient to know the reasoning behind the system. You know, for someone who benefited a lot from the system himself, you sure are sounding ungrateful. Lex laughed at Mary's accusation. I don't mean to be ungrateful, honestly. The system is amazing, and has improved my life in a million different ways, not to mention it literally saved my life by removing a tumor I would not have even known about without the system. I just feel like things aren't as simple as I was assuming them to be. While talking to Mary, Lex was also adjusting his emotions. When he got the system, he'd accepted such a massive change way too easily, probably under the influence of his tumor. Now that he was free to think properly, he was just processing the shock that probably should have hit him right on the first day. Right, last question. And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. At this, Mary raised an eyebrow. This new and improved Lex was way too thorough. Before the midnight games, before I even got the quest, you told me to ace the next quest. I don't think the system would let you give me hints even before it gave me a quest. So, what was that about?